The moment the main character stepped into the dungeon, the deeper they went, the more the danger grabbed them by the throat. Stepping over the corpses of slain monsters that littered the floor, his face stayed ice-cold and unshaken, lit only by the dim, flickering glow seeping through the damp stone walls as he pushed forward. A weak, eerie glow flickered, and suddenly a brand new chamber stretched out ahead. At the heart of the room, a monster loomed, frozen in place but radiating a choking wave of menace, and as the light crawled over his face, his eyes tightened while he sized up the thing. It was the crazy mantis, an SSS-level nightmare, towering and razor-still, its scythe-like arms cocked like they'd snap out and strike any second. And he froze because an SSS threat was on a whole other planet, even compared to the Demon Lord, who was only level S. This labyrinth felt deadly wrong, like it was hunting him. And before he could even process it, the crazy mantis exploded forward out of nowhere, its speed so blinding it stole his breath, but he snapped into motion just as fast, dodging like he'd been waiting for that lunge. He juked out of the lethal strike by a hair, then in one smooth surge, he lifted his gun and fired. The stone chamber shook as the report blasted through. When the bullet tore into one of the mantis' limbs, it snapped off clean in an instant. He didn't hesitate, he sprang into the air, landed behind the creature, and blasted it again. The monster let out a blood-curdling shriek that rattled the dungeon walls like they were about to crumble. It snapped back with a brutal swing, but it never even got to land, because another shot tore through the chaos, way stronger than the first, and the hits exploded blood across the air, turning the stone floor into a crimson haze. As the clash finally went quiet, memories from another world crashed back into his mind. Japan's everyday high school life suddenly felt unreal, like a distant dream slipping out of reach. At 17, Take-to Junpei remembered standing alone in that hallway, surrounded, cornered, and trapped by a pack of delinquents, just like the nightmare he'd never escaped. Kaido Shoyuta, the group's leader, loomed over him and barked for money Junpei didn't have, while a mean sneer cracked deeper on Kaido's face as he taunted the way Junpei's voice shook. Without a heads-up, Kito rammed his foot into Junpei's stomach and knocked the breath straight out of him. The others laughed like villains as he crumpled to his knees, and then their fists came down right after. Punches hit like they meant it. No mercy, just bruises stacking on bruises from the day before. Take-to Junpei's whole daily life was this brutal loop of humiliation and pain that never gave him a break. He begged for a calm, normal second year of high school, but reality slammed the door on that wish. Then a girl's voice cut straight through the jeers, strong, steady, and impossible to ignore. Tatsumiya Noriko stood right there, her razor-sharp gaze locked on everything unfolding in front of her. The bullies stumbled back for a second, annoyed that she wouldn't stay out of it. Junpei jerked his gaze away, refusing to look at her as shame burned hot in his chest. The boys kept taunting her, yelling that she was his wife, then sneered as she tried to shield him. Noriko shot them a cold glance, stepped forward with iron resolve, and grabbed Junpei's arm, yanking him away as their laughter faded behind them. As they strode down the hall, an eerie silence clung to the space between them. Junpei finally snapped, telling her to stay out of it. This wasn't her problem, but Noriko just shook her head. She reminded him that years ago, he'd stepped in for her when she was getting bullied, and now she couldn't just look the other way. She told him, "I know you're stronger than you think. Deep under all that pain and humiliation, your courage is still alive." Even if the whole world turned on him, she wouldn't. She just stood there with iron calm and swore they'd carry the weight together. Junpei froze in stunned silence, words stuck in his throat after hearing her, like the whole world held its breath for a long heartbeat. Then thoughts finally surged back, and he understood one brutal truth. Nothing in his life would ever shift unless he changed himself first. Even if it was just a tiny step, he had to take it for Noriko's sake. Then determination surged through him, until a familiar, brutal voice snapped from behind and tore his resolve apart. Kaido's voice sliced through the air like a blade, and he was right back at it, demanding his money again today. Junpei went stone still as tension seized his whole body, and right before either of them could even blink, something eerie happened. The air rippled like it was alive, and the space around them started to twist and warp. Colors smeared together as the world bent in ways that made no sense. The hallway stretched, folded, and stretched again until logic broke. Kito and Junpei both sucked in a gasp as their surroundings melted into a wild swirl of distortion. A brutal dizziness slammed into them, and Junpei's mind went into full panic mode. What is happening? His vision blurred to nothing, then dropped straight into black. When his eyes flickered open again, everything shattered. His usual school hallway was gone, and in its place loomed a wild, foreign landscape he couldn't recognize. Confusion and fear tore across every single face. Everyone stood there, stunned and totally clueless about what just went down, or where they even were, until a calm voice cut through the air from up ahead. Someone promised they'd get the full rundown, and everyone whipped around to see where it came from. There stood a boy, faintly smiling, and somehow his presence crushed the room even though he looked like he was still too young to be taken seriously. Everyone went stone still, and pure disbelief crashed onto their faces all at once. Kito's face twisted into pure terror and rage, sweat pouring down his temple as he blared for answers. Then the boy just smirked like it was funny. Before Kito could think, he raged forward, charging at him, shouting and demanding to know where they were. But just as Kito closed in, the world flipped again. Then the boy's calm voice sliced through the chaos, saying he got Kito's frustration, but that all the yelling was driving him crazy. Right then, something nobody could see tore through the air, and Kaido's face twisted as his skin ripped open. Pain and pure confusion tore out of his scream. Then his entire head detonated, blood and shattered fragments blasting across the ground. Everyone froze on the spot, stunned into silence by the brutal sight that just hit them, while Nariko's eyes went wide, and her whole body started to shake. Junpei locked eyes on his blood-soaked hands, and his thoughts spun out of control. Then his shaking fingers grazed his face, feeling warm blood mixed with bits of flesh and shards of bone. The truth of what he was seeing slammed into him like a nightmare with no escape. Then, with a casual snap of the boy's fingers, reality flipped right back. Kito's head snapped back into place right before their eyes. The blood drained away, and his terrified gasp ripped through the air once more, while everyone froze, their minds torn between horror and total disbelief. Kito stammered in pure confusion, shouting questions about what just happened and what that boy really was. Then the boy's face twitched into a faint smile and admitted, "I haven't introduced myself." With calm, crushing authority, he declared he was the creator of their world, basically a god. Kito's confusion exploded all over again, the same stammering questions firing off as everything kept spinning and spinning. The words slammed into the air like a weight, and he kept going, confessing he'd once been human, billions of years ago, before he rose to divinity. Over 3 billion years had passed, but he didn't even bother counting anymore. He talked with creepy calm, saying that even gods had problems, like the fact they couldn't die, because immortality wasn't a gift, it was a curse that dragged on forever. And with that endless time, boredom didn't just sit there, it forced them to hunt for something, anything, to entertain themselves. So yeah, he said, out of pure boredom and endless time, he decided to cook up a brand new kind of amusement, one where it's all about them, by yanking them straight into another world, and then a suffocating silence swallowed the whole group. Junpei's mind spun out of control, like reality couldn't even keep up, because nobody could speak. So how on earth were they supposed to find words with something like this staring them down? That boy, this so-called god, kept talking with a calm, eerie smile, saying his world wasn't here at all. He claimed it sat in another dimension, the beta fantasy world, where kings from different nations cast summoning rituals to pull heroes straight into their plans. And this time, he admitted, he let that summoning magic yank Junpei and the others into that realm. Noriko trembled as she forced the words out, her voice cracking with pure confusion. "We don't get any of this." The god paused, just listening, and then she begged him, swearing they only wanted a normal life, that they never asked for this, and that all they wanted was to go home. By the end, her voice shattered, and her desperation echoed through the cold, empty space around them. The god snapped back, demanding to know why he'd send them home, after he'd already laid everything out. His face fell into darkness, and he snapped that he was bored. Then fear crawled into Junpei's eyes as he realized the god wasn't divine anymore, but the twisted grin of someone completely unhinged. He clocked it. Kaido and the crew finally felt how bad things really were, and then the god snapped his eyes to Junpei, asking if Junpei understood everything so far, and Junpei answered with a shaky, unsure voice. Still unshaken, the god kept talking. Then he ordered everyone to stare at the glowing status screens right in front of them. He told them that the moment they stepped into this new world, levels and ability points were everywhere. Then he broke it down. The average person ran with about 50 HP and 20 AP. Using that as their measuring stick, they could finally judge where they stood. Then Kaido's eyes snapped wide the moment he saw his own status. Then he flashed a confident grin, realizing just how intimidating his power looked. His status screen read Magic Warrior, Level 1, and the god stepped in, confirming Kito's strength and praising his skills. Kito spun toward his crew and demanded their stats, and one admitted he wasn't as strong as Kito, but he was still solid. Another squinted at the words Ultra Grade sitting at the bottom of their screens and asked what it meant, and the god smiled and said it was his gift to them. He promised a bonus skill the moment the game started, then said Ultra Grade was the top rank you could ever get, so he warned them to spend it smart, not recklessly. Kaido closed in on Junpei to check his stats. Then the instant he peered into Junpei's window, he exploded into loud laughter, yanking Junpei by the head like it was a joke, mocking him as the insults rained harder and harder, until his crew surged over, desperate to see what all the commotion was about. Junpei's status flashed on screen, and everyone saw the job, none level 1. Then they burst into loud, mocking laughter, ripping into him for being jobless and yelling none, over and over between laughs. The god popped up beside Junpei and told him straight up, no job, no color, so he was wide open to learn whatever skills he wanted. While everyone else could get power the easy way, he'd have to claw it from the world, by fighting his enemies and stealing their abilities. Kito narrowed his eyes and said that if you looked at it the right way, this could turn into a brutal power, and Junpei nodded in silence, while the god sealed it with a confident, yeah, it'll be a massive advantage. But only if Junpei could wipe out enemies solo. He started to doubt, straight up asking if Junpei even thought he could handle that, because foes with rare, broken abilities are basically unheard of. The god's voice snapped into something colder as he smirked, and said that an impossible game would be anything but boring. He dropped a sly hint about a labyrinth packed with abnormal monsters, maybe even something Junpei would want, and the wicked grin on his face sent dread straight through Junpei's bones. Junpei spun toward Nariko, frozen out there in the distance. Then he shouted her name. She whispered that Kito and the others were treating all of this like a game, and deep down she feared that the moment they stepped into that other world, it would instantly turn brutal, maybe even fatal. Still, she figured they had no choice but to bank on Kito, because among them all, his stats were the best by a mile. She pushed them to go all in together, but Junpei said nothing, nervous sweat beads already popping up across his face. Suddenly, the god's voice roared again, declaring they were vanishing. Then the air around them warped and twisted, and everyone snapped to a complete freeze in pure shock. The god watched them and smirked, thinking, Junpei Taekda, this jobless skill hunter, looks like a wild thing to study. For now, he only wished them safe travels. Just like Junpei's, Noriko's status window also flat out listed her job as none, a villager girl. God's voice still haunted Junpei's head, booming that he was the world's true creator, someone so far above everything that he could yank them into a brand new world. And right there, tucked inside that fading echo, Noriko's voice slipped in, soft, warm and steady, promising him that even if the whole world turned its back on him, she never would. Her words lit up the chaos like a tiny flame, pushing him forward with one truth: they'd face it together. The sharp thud of a hoe biting into the dirt yanked June's payback out of his daze, and the impact jolted his brain, blasting the swirling memories away. Someone shouted his name. Noriko's voice cut through again, and this time it wasn't a memory at all. She was right nearby, asking for a moment, and Junpei promised he'd be there soon, thinking about how long it had been since they first landed in this world. The king of the realm dragged them in and hailed them as heroes who'd crush every enemy from neighboring nations. Yet the moment they took the field, the hype died fast, turning into defeat after defeat, until the king's patience finally snapped, and he tossed them aside as nothing but worthless failures. They got thrown out of the capital like trash, just disposable failures, so now they were stuck in some tiny remote village, surviving on their own with nowhere else to go. Junpei scanned the area with jittery nerves, and the villagers' stares hit like ice, full of suspicion, dripping with contempt. They'd shown up during a famine, and all they'd done was bring more hungry mouths to worry about. At least I'll work, he told himself, so he spent every single day plowing the fields, clawing for his spot, determined to prove he was useful. He shoved the guilt aside, and told himself he had to change, for Noriko. Then Noriko's next word hit Junpei like a punch. She said sacrifice, and his whole body froze as disbelief crashed across his face. A faint smile spread across hers, and she nodded like she was certain of it, reminding him what the elders told them back when they first arrived. The famine, she explained, wasn't random at all. It came from a labyrinth nearby, and that cursed place demanded sacrifices to keep the calamity trapped. Junpei insisted this was none of their business, just the villagers worrying for themselves, but Noriko shook her head, calm and cold. Outsiders, sure, yet she sat at the very bottom, and her skills, her abilities, everything about her screamed useless. She told him the truth. Those sacrifices weren't something anyone wanted. The elder picked who would go, and somehow she'd been singled out as the perfect choice. Junpei just froze. Her calm acceptance hit him like a wall. The silence between them thickened as the truth finally landed. Then she kept going, saying the elder's decision was already locked in, and she couldn't refuse it. Panic flared in Zhu and Pei's eyes as he urged her to run. She didn't have to do this. Noriko shook her head and softly refused, and the truth hit hard. They'd been sent to this village by the king's orders. If they ran, they'd get stamped as criminals. In this strange world where they didn't know a thing, where could they even go? And if they got caught, it wouldn't just be her. It would spell death for every last one of them. Junpei froze, speechless, his heart twisting like it was being wrung out. Noriko gave him a gentle smile, trying to calm the fear, and told him it would be okay. Being a sacrifice didn't automatically mean dying. The ritual was simple. They tossed her straight into the labyrinth, packed with horrors she couldn't name, but she would live. I'll survive, she promised him, calm as steel, and those words sent Pei's blood running cold. His hand shook, then clamped into a fist. He locked eyes with her and swore he wouldn't let it happen. He'd swap places, and he'd be the one who gets sacrificed. Noriko's eyes snapped open with pure shock. Before she could even speak, a soft rustle crept up behind them. Both snapped their heads toward the noise, and out of the shadows slid Kito. Junpei's voices dropped, heavy with dread, when he muttered Kito's name under his breath. Kito only gave a small smirk, like he'd caught every word. Junpei couldn't stop thinking about it. Ever since they hit the village, Kaido stopped bullying him cold. Junpei figured it had to be because Kaido joined the local vigilantes, like that put a leash on his old violence. But lately, something felt off. Kaido wasn't just quiet, he looked weighed down, unsettled, like he was dragging around a crushing secret. Then Kaido looked him straight in the eye and told him flat out. Junpei wasn't the same person anymore, not after coming here. With his eyes shut tight, Kaido blurted out that he was sorry for how he'd treated Junpei back then, and Junpei just stood there, totally speechless at the surprise apology. Then Kaido said they might need to bolt for safety after all, and Noriko snapped back that it was her. She was the one chosen to be the sacrifice, but Junpei shut that down immediately. His voice blazed with pure determination, and he vowed, "I'll go instead." Noriko snapped his name out loud, stunned by the sheer fire in his resolve. Junpei locked eyes with her and confessed that when she said they should do their best together, he vowed to change, just for her. And from that day on, he threw himself into every effort, never once letting go. He let out a thin, fearless smile and promised, "I'm not dying, I'll survive whatever hits me." They'd definitely cross paths again. Then, later on, they finally made the call. Junpei leaned in and huddled with the other men to talk it through. And with their hopes locked in, they sprinted straight for the labyrinth. Then finally it rose into view, and as they stood staring at it, Junpei dropped his voice and muttered under his breath. The massive structure hung over them like a nightmare, dark, twisted, and totally unnatural. That aura was so thick it made their hearts shake like crazy. Junpei inched forward like he was afraid of what might leap out, and the others trailed after him, their footsteps thumping through the empty, hollow space. Right when he hit the white boundary line that marked the labyrinth's entrance, he slammed on the brakes. Kaido jabbed a finger at it, saying it had to mean the threshold. Then he snapped his gaze to Junpei and demanded, "Are you sure?" Junpei went silent at first, and Noriko's voice shook as she begged, "Let me go instead." But Junpei shut her down with a rock-solid refusal. Junpei spun toward Kaido and ordered him to watch Nariko while he was gone. Kaido just nodded and swore it. Fear flashed across Junpei's eyes, but he forced his breath steady. "From here on, I'm in the sacrificial labyrinth," he told himself, wondering if he'd ever claw his way out alive. With raw fury in his chest, he swore he'd never die. No, not for himself, but for Noriko, and for every single person who'd shown up to send him off. Suddenly, Noriko's voice sliced through the tension and shouted his name. She started talking about the labyrinth, endless ravines, yawning chasms, the kind of place that swallows hope whole. They say it showed up thousands of years ago, and ever since, it's been raining misfortune and unleashing catastrophe on the world, and she swore the labyrinth was basically unstoppable. Countless famous adventurers stormed in, but not one ever came back. She screamed that there was no way he'd come back alive, because the survival rate was flat out zero. Junpei snapped his head toward her, stunned and demanding answers, but Nariko brushed him off, her voice turning razor-sharp as she claimed that the Royal Research Institution's magic division said the labyrinth didn't belong to this world at all. With a sly smirk, she told him that the moment he stepped over the threshold, he'd disappear, out of this world and the next, wiped away into some brand new place. And that's exactly why the labyrinth near the village had been christened the Sacrificial Labyrinth, and Junpei froze on the spot, his whole body locked up with pure shock. Before Noriko could even give him time to react, she leaned in and planted a kiss on Kaido right in front of him, and Juin's eyes snapped wide with pure disbelief. The other guys erupted into laughter, yelling that it was a total success, and their wild cackling bounced through the air around them. Kaido scoffed, then tossed out a mocking apology, smirking that he and Noriko had only just started dating, and his voice went ice cold as he said the whole plan would have been pointless unless Junpei, the sacrifice, agreed of his own free will, so that's why they decided to pull a little trick on him and turn it into entertainment. Honestly, fleeing that sacrifice ritual would have been way too boring, so Noriko finally spoke up and admitted the truth. The village elder really had chosen her as the sacrifice, and that's exactly why she and Kito cooked up a plan together. Then with a cruel smirk he pressed Junpei, saying, "So you still don't get it?" Mocking how, with their stats looking similar, he'd rather bet on the worth of a woman's body over a worthless guy like him. And Junpei finally blurted out in a shaking, crushed voice that sounded like shock and pain as he demanded if everything. It was all a lie, every bit of it. Junpei snapped his gaze to Nariko, begging for a denial, but she didn't hesitate. She confirmed it was true. Tears flooded his eyes as he fought to speak, clinging to the promise she once made that she'd never hate him. Nariko just let out a cold, mocking laugh and said she didn't hate him. She simply didn't like him either. Junpei blurted out, begging for answers about her earlier words, protect each other, help each other, and Noriko just smirked, saying those promises only mattered back when they were still tucked safely in the safe zone. Then her lips twisted into a sneer as she said that once he finally understood how deep his despair ran, he'd realized those promises were nothing but hollow lies, comforting fools before they woke up. She kept going, her voice dripping with cruel delight, and she couldn't believe he'd actually stepped up to take her place as the sacrifice. She laughed in his face for being kind, sneering that kindness was sweet, but it wouldn't fix a thing, and then her smile vanished as her eyes hardened and her final verdict snapped out of her mouth. He was nothing but a total idiot. That brutal insult ripped the last of Junpei's strength away, tears poured down his face, and a crushing ache slammed into his chest until nothing else could even register. Then Kito's voice roared right beside him. "I've heard enough, go die in the labyrinth." And before Junpei could react, Kito swung his foot and kicked him hard. Ju and Pei's bodies got yanked backward like the world just punched them. Junpei slammed hard onto the ground, skidded and tumbled across the white boundary marking the labyrinth's entrance. Then the earth lurched and shook, and a clear wall slowly rose up, trapping him and cutting him off from the outside world. Junpei's mind erupted with screams as he stared at that word, trapped in the wall and clawing at his thoughts, while Kaido grinned with cold cruelty and told him they were leaving right now, because with Junpei's pathetic state, not even the best pursuers could ever catch them. He spat out a mocking goodbye, swearing it was the last time he'd ever bully him. Then Noriko piled on, thanking him through a sarcastic grin for all the fun she'd had. Jump's eyes burned with pain and betrayal as the two people he trusted most turned on him, and his mind went totally blank, like every ounce of emotion had been ripped out. Later, he caught himself mumbling under his breath, alone, because he couldn't piece together a single thing that came after that moment. He just kept trudging on, dazed and empty, until, eventually, he spotted an open door right in front of him. Without a second thought, Junpei lunged forward and stepped through it, even as grief and confusion churned in his chest. Deep in the dark room beyond, something was already waiting, an awful monster looming silently, its presence buzzing with pure menace as it stared him down. Junpei's memories from just moments ago slammed back into his head. Everything had been foggy until he laid eyes on the scene in front of him, and clarity hit him like lightning. He froze dead in his tracks, nerves screaming, staring down the terrifying monster in front of him. The god's words suddenly thundered inside his head, like that skill was the same blessing meant for everyone. Without thinking, he trusted his instincts and activated it. A glowing screen flickered in front of the monster, flashing its stats. No life king, no undead king, danger level. SS confusion and fear gripped Junpei. SS level danger, what kind of warning was that even supposed to be? Junpei yanked himself backward on pure instinct, but the floor screamed under his weight, splitting and failing beneath him. He stared down at the fissures crawling out under his feet, and a cold dread slammed into his chest. Then he tried to look up too late. The undead king was already on him, his rotting bulk looming in front of Junpei, and Junpei ripped out a strangled cry. Just as he tried to spin and run, the monster's blade slammed across his back. A burst of unbearable pain detonated from within, and then his body crumpled to the ground, eyes going wide with pure horror as scattered bones littered the floor around him. With a thunderous crack, the floor shattered completely, and Junpei's body dropped into the black abyss. As he plunged, he watched the undead king's silhouette shrink higher and higher above him. Darkness ripped his vision away. When he finally snapped back to consciousness, he couldn't believe it. He was alive. Pain was gone like it never existed. He threw his hand behind him and watched the wound on his back seal up right in front of his eyes. Flesh and skin fused at lightning speed, and he couldn't even process what he was seeing. Dim light haloed the area, because he was sitting on top of a mountain of corpses inside a glowing circle of death. Confused and on edge, he spotted a sharp glint deep in the bones, a tiny slate or maybe a card. He snatched it up, staring at the weird writing etched into the surface like it meant nothing, until the card suddenly shimmered, and a grin-filled image of a man flickered to life, his laughter drifting through the air like a ghost. It was some kind of recording. When the man greeted him, he made it clear this wasn't a chat, it was a message. He'd once been an adventurer who cleared this very dungeon, and now he was dropping his hardened advice for whoever dared come next. He started talking like they were old friends, casual, confident, claiming his level sat around 200, a huge rank since the world's top swordsman barely scraped 300. He said his powers were retrovision and appraisal, the exact stuff that had carried him this far, but Junpei's gut screamed the truth. This place was way more dangerous than he'd ever guessed. And with that, the adventurer kept going. He told Junpei that the creature he'd just run into was razor-sharp. This kind of tight dungeon turns the smallest sound into a death sentence. Yet somehow there were weird safe zones hidden inside the maze. Monsters couldn't cross into them and injuries would heal there. The man couldn't explain how those zones even worked, but the fact they existed still made his skin crawl. Then Junpei finally understood. Those glowing rings around him weren't decoration at all. They were one of those safe zones. His whole vibe flipped, and then he started talking about that guy, the undead king. He said it wasn't just powerful, it was absurdly unstoppable. Physical and magical hits got completely shut down, and even through his retrovision, he'd watched ordinary attacks fail dead in their tracks. Junpei just went silent, dread sinking into his bones. What kind of monster was that thing? The message kept going. He begged whoever came after him to leave clues for the next survivors. He even swore he'd seen the monster get beaten over and over through retrovision, but every single time, a brutal blast of magic would slam down and cover the whole scene. And no matter how many times he tried, he still never got to see exactly how they pulled off the win. So he laid out the only smart move: escape right now. He told Junpei that if he bolted east, he'd hit a door to the next level, so run like your life, S on the line, because the safe zone shields you but it won't keep you fed. If you stay, you'll starve, period. Then the recording cut off with a cheeky little farewell, adios, and the man's image simply disappeared. Junpei froze for a beat, then felt the message hit his chest, like a switch flipped, and that ugly panic got swallowed by a weird, steady calm. If he stayed, starvation would swallow him whole. If he ran, he might actually live. With one quiet breath, he pushed himself to his feet. Up above, the undead king was hunting. And now Junpei finally understood. That thing wasn't above him anymore. He was under it, and the only way out was straight ahead. Junpei snapped his gaze upward and followed the pillar's rough stone with his eyes, then told himself with iron certainty that he could climb it, and he had to. As soon as he hit the top, he exploded into a sprint toward the exit with every last bit of strength he had, because success was shaky, but there was zero choice. A faint, mocking laugh slipped out of him. Survive first, deal with everything else later. Right now, that was all that mattered. Then he froze mid-step. A memory snapped back to him, the answer hiding in his last appraisal. The monster's attacks were judged useless, yet its HP was tagged low and its vitality weak. So why did it feel so unstoppable? If those attacks were really useless, why was his HP still so dangerously low? His teeth ground together like he couldn't take it anymore. Think, come on, think, Carter Junpei. His mind raced like a storm, because right here was the choice that decided whether he lived or died. That creature's body was paper-thin and its health was basically nothing, yet it refused to die, so what was the trick? The letter he found had to be true, which meant the undead king could be beaten, but only under some exact condition. Still, he couldn't ignore what the man warned him. Nullified attacks, area of effect, magic, chaotic fighting, explosions, everything that should have worked confirmed it wouldn't. Junpei went still, breath snagging in his throat as the truth finally hit. His pulse slammed harder, the pieces snapping into place. The chaos, the massive explosion, and why those normal hits never worked. It all lined up. That had to be the way they crushed the creature before. But then panic roared in. He was alone. How in the world was he supposed to recreate a battlefield-level explosion by himself? He glanced up again and boom, his eyes caught it. Sparks of an idea flying, and he thought, wait, if he used that, maybe, just maybe. Then his stare snapped sharper and widened with shock as a new realization hit harder than before. If it's like this. So the answer had been staring me in the face the whole time. Everything clicked. The conditions, the setting, the setup. His heart slammed in his chest with pure, wild energy. Because victory was dangling right there within reach, he just had to move. Then he slammed the brakes, his face twisted, and the light in his eyes faded fast. Doubt slithered back in. No, he couldn't do this. Acting reckless right now could wipe him out for good. He forced his breathing to slow, drilled into his head, focus on the escape. Maybe the next floor would spit out weaker monsters, ones he could actually take. Just as that fragile idea sparked in his head, Noriko's voice came crashing back like a memory with teeth. The words he once swallowed whole now tasted like lies in this nightmare. Hollow, bullshit desperation dressed up as truth. And right there, he went silent. Maybe, just maybe, Noriko was just as hopeless as he was. And her sweet charm, her forced submission, was nothing but her one lifeline to survive the powerful. But he had no clue what she truly felt. Or if every word she'd thrown at him was real, or just smoke. But here, what hit like a punchline. Her choice had been right. Because in this world, wherever you stand, the truth never shifts. The weak didn't stand a chance, trampled, crushed, gone. Junpei yanked at his hair, teeth clenched, frustration ripping through him. What the hell is wrong with you, take to Junpei? Rage roared in his head, already plotting a better target on the next floor, like the whole thing was some twisted joke. Hoping the next area would be safer, kinder, that was a fantasy. So he bolted straight for the wall. He surged back into the climb, smashing his palms raw on jagged stone. Level 1 again. Trash stats. No power, no skills, absolutely nothing, he told himself, and that's exactly why he had to keep going. Because if there's even a single chance, he'll take it. No matter how tiny it is, I'll snatch it. His fingers scraped along a ledge. He hauled himself up, lungs burning, and finally clawed his way to the top. Then the undead king loomed right in front of him. Its hollow eyes shimmered in the dark, and Junpei stared right back, no flinch, while his body shook and his resolve burned hotter than fear. The monster started creeping forward, slow and menacing. Come on, come closer. Juin's thoughts hammered in time with his heartbeat. just a little more. As the creature closed the distance, he pulled in a deep, shaking breath. Now he slammed his foot down into the dirt, and the undead king's scythe roared upward, gleaming in the dark as it lined up to decimate him. Junpei let out a roar that ripped from his chest, then launched himself upward, springing into the air and soaring out of the undead king's reach. Junpei launched through the air and yelled as he dove onto the undead king, right as the beast snapped into action and swung that giant scythe up to meet him. The blade clipped your forehead, grazing past you and tearing a nasty cut across your brow. Blood sprayed through the air like a wild arc, but Junpei didn't blink. His momentum shoved him downward, dragging him nearer and nearer to the ground. The undead king's hollow eyes tracked Junpei's every move with terrifying accuracy, but there was a flicker of doubt, like it couldn't quite grasp what Junpei was trying to do. He slammed down beside the monster with a crushing hit, and the shockwave cracked the already fragile ground under his feet. Cracks tore outward in every direction until the earth finally surrendered, and on Junpei's bloodied faces, a wicked grin snapped into place as the floor dropped out from under them both. He finally got it. This was what the No-Life King's power really was. The beast could wipe out attacks, but only when it recognized them as attacks in its mind. Anything outside its awareness, anything it didn't see coming, it couldn't stop. Junpei crashed down beside the thing, his mind screaming with clarity, because if it couldn't sense the threat, it couldn't defend itself. He couldn't block it. Turns out that loophole was his doom and his victory all at once. The undead king dropped like a meteor, smashing straight into the spike field below, and those jagged rocks tore through its rotting body, crunching bones to dust. Junpei slammed onto the lower ground, pain ripping through his whole body, but he still clawed forward, crawling over shattered terrain until he dragged himself into the glowing safe zone. The second he crossed that line, heat flooded him, and the light stitched his wounds closed, knitting his skin back together. He lay there, panting as the truth finally hit. Those wild battles from the adventurer's note, the huge explosions, they weren't random at all. They were bait, pure and simple, meant to herd the monster straight into a trap. And with a body that fragile, a drop like that would shatter it for good. Every one of the people who came before him must have stumbled on the same secret trick. A tired, relieved grin spread across Ju and Pei's faces. He'd done it. He'd killed the undead king, and without the safe zone's healing power, he would have been dead. He was supposed to be done for, yet he clung to life and survived, and that crushing relief exploded into pure exhilaration, because for the first time since stepping into this dungeon, he'd actually won. But his victory streak got snatched away. Hot heat flared in his hands as if something was pouring into him, and he stared at his palms in pure confusion while a translucent status window blinked into view. His level was rocketing up, 25, 30, 60, never stopping. Junpei stared in pure disbelief as it blasted upward, the digits strobing faster and faster, and then it hit him. He gasped and whispered, "It's working," while experience points surged into him non-stop, stacking up without end. Numbers shot up once more, level 178, and his status points blasted to 885. He rose to his feet, shaking, split between pure disbelief and awe. 885 points hit like a thunderclap, reshaping everything in him, so he immediately had one burning question. How do I spend this and how do I make it count? His gaze snapped to the undead king's lifeless corpse, and that god's voice from before crawled back into his head. Defeat your enemies and take their skills. Junpei dropped into a crouch by the fallen monster, freaking out over how this worked. Then he decided to go for it. He pressed his hand to its skull, and the moment he made contact, the creature's body started to dimly glow. Lightning-bright lines spiraled upward and snapped into shimmering cards hovering in front of him, each one stamped with a skill or item. Then Junpei's eyes blew wide. Weapons were right here, and one card alone showed something unmistakable. A gun. He stared in disbelief, realizing something like this could exist in this world. No way it was native. This had to be stolen from another realm, an artifact some adventurer from a different world left behind. And then, right on cue, the gun snapped into his hand. Its metallic surface felt cold and strange under his fingertips. Then another card slid into view, refusing to show any weird flaws or abnormalities. He didn't exactly know what to make of it, but one thing was crystal clear. This thing was priceless. Then a fresh card slid into view, undead flesh on display, and the description underneath snapped his focus like a trap, daring him with just one bite. He froze, eyes locked on the words as his heart thundered. The way he shrugged off every abnormality felt unreal, and the timing couldn't have been sharper. If he paired them together, if the combo actually worked, he might finally rip himself out of this living nightmare. Resolve ignited in his chest. Then he snatched up the card, and right away the item burst into existence in his palm. Junpei stared down at the rotting, grey remains of the undead king, frozen in silence for a long moment, until the stink hit him and made him gag. He looked at the grotesque thing sitting in his hand and thought, bone-deep disbelief, is this really what I'm meant to eat? Junpei snapped into stunned silence, drowning in a storm of thoughts as the questions slammed into him. yes or no, leaving nothing human left, and a cold sweat began to crawl down his cheek. He yanked open his status window and started throwing points where they mattered. The numbers kept shooting higher, and his eyes popped wide with shock. Then he hurried to double-check his skills. He stared at the appraisal, the resistance to every abnormality, and 9 empty skill slots glaring back at him, and he forced himself not to drop his guard, because whatever hit him in the next level could be even worse. A tiny shred of escape still flickered in the dark, but with his strength right now, the chances were basically zero, and his eyes slid back down to the rotting flesh clenched in his hand. Disgust contorted his face, but fierce resolve blazed in his eyes. Then he snapped his mouth shut and bit down. He forced those bites down, jaw clenched tight as sweat poured down his brow. He kept replaying the question in his head until the final answer hit. Yes. Each bite tasted foul, but every chew kept carving the past sharper. Keto, Noriko, the betrayal, and that bitter, burning rage blazing hotter. They dumped him here to rot and die, like they expected the world to just shrug. Fury surged through him as he crammed the last piece down. Flesh tore away, and with it, every last shred of hesitation vanished. For one crushing, tense moment, everything went still, like the world held its breath. Then his gaze snapped to life, burning with an unbreakable, untamable fire. He didn't say a word. He ripped a scrap of cloth, wrapped it into a rough little pouch, and muttered Kaido and Noriko under his breath while he worked. Then he slid the gun inside, tightened the knot with steady, deadly calm, and sealed it up. He shrugged the undead king's cloak onto his shoulders, like it was the last piece of armor he needed. With his voice shaking from pure rage, he vowed he'd tear every last one of them apart. On the floor, the god lounged like it owned the place, and burst into a soft, amused laugh, murmuring that he'd seen it all coming, because this is exactly how it was going to play out. A woman slid up and offered him a drink with total respect, and when he turned, a faint smile tugged at his lips as he thanked her. Then he said the human down below was nothing short of extraordinary. But her voice turned icy and desperate. She snapped that she didn't care about anything at all. All she wanted was to die. The god brushed off her begging, gaze locked somewhere else, and only smirked that he was curious how far Kata Junpei could be pushed through the dungeon. Behind him, the woman's screams kept repeating the same plea over and over. Please kill me. The god only smirked, murmuring Kata Junpei's name like it was pure poison and pure pleasure. Far below, deep in the dungeon's pitch-black gloom, a colossal monster loomed over Junpei like a nightmare made flesh. He snapped on his appraisal instinct, and boom, a glowing window lit up in front of him. Mammoth beetle ***, danger level, ***. The description hit like a punch. This thing was a heavily armored charging-type brute. Junpei's face tightened, so all those points dumped into speed. Yeah, it paid off. Without that edge, the creature's raw speed would have already crushed him flat, and that same breakneck velocity also let him spot the safe zone sooner. He shot a look at the glowing slate, at the letter the mystery adventurer had left behind, and grumbled that he'd finally paid back that nosy old man's advice right on time. The letter's image flickered back to life, and suddenly that cheerful, recorded laughter rang through the air. He greeted Junpei like they'd known each other for years, teasing that a hero might be brewing right here. Surviving the undead king wasn't some easy win. Then, like always, he started firing off his tips. And get this, the boss of this floor was none other than the giant beetle he'd just fought. And he swore the defense was ridiculously strong, because that thing just kept ramming forward at whatever dared get in its way. Sure, dodging a couple shots might save you for a second, but beating it like that, no chance. That's why he cackled and told Junpei to trust the old reliable plan, run like hell. You've only got this much time, he said, flashing that grin. Then adios, amigo, his image vanished. Junpei stayed frozen for a moment, smirk twitching on his face. Running was the safest play, sure, but if he only ever fled, he'd never get stronger. So someday escape wouldn't be enough, meaning he had to grab every single chance, even the terrifying ones, to power himself up. 10 hours later, Junpei stood again before that mammoth beetle, and the air around him reeked of wet earth and gunpowder. He lifted the firearm in his grip and aimed straight at the towering creature's face, the barrel fixed under the dungeon's weak light as its armor caught the glow. He muttered that the defense was downright insane, still not something he couldn't beat. Junpei unleashed a shot, bang, and the crack of it tore through the air, bouncing off the walls. He kept squeezing off round after round, then backed up fast into the glowing circle where he could finally breathe. Empty shells clattered as he cracked open the gun's chamber, let them tumble onto the floor, then calmly slid in a fresh reload. Now, he just waited for his mana to kick back in before charging forward again. Flames roared. He backed up, reloaded, regenerated, then did it all again. Hours slipped by. His body started moving like a machine, razor efficient. Fight, pause, recover, the whole cycle melted together until it felt like routine. And somehow the more he drained himself, the calmer his exhaustion became. until it turned into quiet, solid satisfaction. He'd camp out with this thing forever if he had to. 70 hours later, the mammoth beetle finally crumpled to the ground. Its legs jerked once, then went dead still. Junpei sucked in a shaky breath, his whole body feeling like it weighed 1,000 pounds, and he muttered that the grind was finally done. Now all he wanted was food. He trudged up to the fallen monster to grab his reward, and the second his hand hit its carapace, the corpse started glowing faintly. 2 cards snapped into existence right in front of him. One glowing red for legendary, one-of-a-kind armor, and the other a rare skill, gulping up power from mammoth beetle flesh. Junpei scanned the descriptions under his breath, armor that bragged about god-tier defense and the other item. It sounded like exactly what it was, flesh, apparently edible. He grimaced hard, then shrugged like, yeah, guess he'd have to choke it down. Elsewhere, the god let out a quiet chuckle, watching everything play out from a distance, and he admitted he wasn't even a little surprised. This was exactly what he'd expected. Now the only thing that mattered was what Junpei would do next. How far would he push to break free? The god smirked, saying the boy's choice was already locked in, and then the woman spoke again, same dead tone, please kill me. Days slipped by, and at last Junpei found himself standing face to face with another brutal stone door. He yanked in a deep breath, shoved the door wide, and stepped straight through. Across the way, an enormous, dimly lit chamber stretched out like it went on forever. And just when he thought he'd missed his chance, another safe zone popped up right at the entrance. Relief exploded across his face. Then a colossal shadow crashed over him like a closing trap. Junpei snapped his gaze upward. Right in front of him, a massive 3-headed beast loomed with black fur spiking and red eyes blazing like fire, yet his face stayed calm as he called out appraisal once more. The window snapped open right in front of him. Cerberus stared back, danger level blazing, and a mythical ring hung there like a doom signal. For a split second he froze, then a laugh ripped out of his throat, half disbelief and half defiance. A mythical ranked monster? What kind of ridiculous title was that supposed to be? In his eyes, it was just a dog. Junpei's gaze slid to the letter beside him. He snatched the letter up and rolled it over in his hand, and there it was again, the same mysterious writing that had shown up before like it was haunting him. The moment he touched it, the man burst out from the parchment once more, all smiles and booming voice. Junpei, you've really screwed yourself this time, he laughed, grinning like a menace. Going up against a mythological monster, that's pure insanity. Only a fool would even think about fighting something like that. The man kept talking, claiming this thing's lightning speed and razor fangs would smash Junpei's chances. So even if Junpei tried firing from afar, the beast would slip every shot like it was nothing. Then his voice tightened and he issued one last warning. Whenever the Cerberus backed up, Junpei had to stay razor alert because that retreat was the cue for the attack. Cold sweat broke across Junpei's forehead as he listened. The man let out a short, helpless laugh and basically admitted there was nothing left to say. This was beyond awful. He pushed Junpei to cook up an escape plan fast, and while he was still chuckling, he warned that if Junpei miraculously got out alive, he'd probably be missing a few limbs. Then he ended the message like he always did, praying their paths would cross someday. Adios, he said, right before his image faded away. Junpei froze in silence, eyes locked on the empty space where the illusion had just evaporated. A sly smirk slid across his face. If Cerberus was truly that brutal, the expert would drop had to be massive. Maybe, just maybe, luck was finally grinning back at him today. Still, he couldn't tell if he'd ever match the monster's speed, or if his plan would even work, and that doubt only sharpened his resolve. He'd test it right now and find out for real. Junpei burst out of the shimmering edge of the safe zone. Every move is controlled to the bone. Then he decides the perfect start is testing his speed first. The moment his foot crossed that line, Cerberus snapped into motion. Before he could even blink, the 3-headed monster surged forward, claws screeching as they ripped across the stone floor. Junpei spun at the last second and barely slipped out of the way as those giant jaws clamped shut inches from his head. His heartbeat rattled like thunder, and he actually grinned at the adrenaline hit, telling himself, I can do this. His agility stat was 1390, and it wasn't some meaningless number anymore. It was proof he'd leveled up. Confidence surged through him. Yeah, it worked. His speed was finally enough to keep up. Now the real fight was here. Junpei dug in with a solid stance, locked eyes with Cerberus, and let his muscles tighten as he braced to strike back. Then right in the middle of the chaos, the monster abruptly froze, as if time itself had snapped. Its posture snapped, and the air around it turned thick, suffocating, and heavy like a warning. Junpei got stuck, like even the universe paused on her. Then out of nowhere, Cerberus blasted a thunderous roar that shook everything. Then the cuss of wave detonated outward, crashing into Junpei and launching him flying backward. He slammed into the ground with a sickening thud, and pain ripped through his whole body, shaking him to the core. A brutal, metallic stench slammed into his mouth, and he strained with all his strength just to lift his head. Smoke billowed from all 3 of the creature's mouths as a glowing status window popped up in front of him, showing the skill, dead howling asterisk. Junpei swore under his breath, This was not supposed to happen. He tried to move, but his body refused to budge, and panic tore through his mind. Maybe those weird defenses were still doing their job. His head could turn, but his arms and legs stayed nailed in place. Cerberus slowly pushed forward, its claws shrieking as they scraped across the cold stone. Move, 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 he barked at himself, but his body stayed locked in place. Panic hammered his thoughts as he kept repeating it, chant after chant, over and over. If his resistance skill was still live, then this fight wasn't done. He just had to slam his body hard enough to break the paralysis and kick his brain back into gear, and right then the Cerberus threw its jaws open, lining up another deadly strike. A tiny spark of an idea lit up Shu and Pei's minds, then a low, breathless chuckle burst out of them. His whole body shook, but his eyes burned with resolve. He straightened up and charged the monster head-on. And right then, he chose the one sure thing that would drown him in unbearable pain. He stuck his tongue out, and then, little by little, slowly clamped his teeth down on it. Cerberus let out a deep, vicious growl that shook the air. 3 heads dropped in perfect sync. Then Junpei clamped down hard, and a burst of blood exploded from his mouth, spraying the stone floor as raw, searing pain detonated through every nerve. Junpei's injured tongue sprayed blood as Cerberus loomed over him, roaring like it meant to tear the world apart. So Junpei braced himself. He thrust his hand toward the monster, then Cerberus exploded forward, lunging at him, clamped down on his arm with brutal fangs, ripped it apart, and left him reeling. A brutal wave of agony smashed into Junpei, and blood spilled from his mouth in a terrifying rush. He staggered back, choking and coughing, and every breath spilled crimson in his throat. Right in front of him, Cerberus snarled as blood streamed from its jaws, chewing on his mangled flesh. Junpei's body shook violently as pain and despair slammed into his mind, turning everything blurry and out of reach. Even while his body screamed from the damage, the chest pain crushed harder, something deeper than the wounds ripping through his skin. Confusion, rage, and grief all slammed together inside him, drowned by one brutal urge. Over and over, the word kill thundered in his skull. Kill everything in this dungeon, kill Kito, kill Noriko, kill them all. Then his thoughts snapped into focus. The haze vanished, and he stared at his arm, torn flesh healed, whole again. Cerberus stood there, towering and locked in place, its huge body shaking like it couldn't hold back. Junpei let out a slow breath, and as he did, darkness crawled across his face. The space between them turned heavy, like the world was holding its breath. Then, out of nowhere, the beast lurched forward, its knees giving out as it staggered. It slammed down with a deafening boom the second it moved. Junpei's shot each other a crooked, faint smile. He shot upright and stared down at the creature on the ground, while his heart hammered like it knew he'd just crossed a line. This was his first time using that ability, and the terrifying truth hit him. He had no idea if it even worked. But the scene in front of him sealed it. Cerberus, even a myth-ranked beast, was already down, devoured by the very arm he'd taken. He sucked in a deep breath, no time to pause or gawk, because that monster might recover any second, and he had to end it right now. Gun up. He opened fire on the creature, but the bullet only skimmed its hide, carving just a shallow scar, because a normal attack stood no chance against something like this. Junpei didn't hesitate. He bit down hard on his own wrist, spraying thick streams of blood, and then thrust that bleeding wound right near the monster's nose. Cerberus twitched hard, its whole body reacting on pure instinct as Junpei's blood dripped straight into its nostrils, spreading that toxin through its system. Then Junpei yanked the bullets out of his gun and he grabbed a handful of dead twigs, tucked the bullets in among them, then slammed the whole bundle hard with a stone. A brutal crack tore through the air, sparks burst into life, and the makeshift pile caught fire. Then smoke started to billow, thin and eerie at first. Then a burst of flames roared upward, snapping into the air as the fire raced across the ground, flickering and dancing right under Cerberus' muzzle, while his nostrils flared like he smelled something burning. It recoiled the second it caught the flame's scent and locked eyes on the fire. Junpei's smirks curled even deeper, like they knew something you didn't. Flames roared to life, and the smoke spiraled up toward the sky as the monster's flesh started to burn. Junpei watched stone cold as Cerberus' hide sizzled, blistered, and melted under the heat, its body spasming while its howls ripped through the dungeon, leaving only the stench of scorched fur and blood. When the flames finally died, he stepped in and reached out, pressing his hand onto the creature's charred remains. Above it, a faint shimmer flickered. Then a skill card slid into view, Dead Howling Asterisk, alongside 2 loot drops, Beast Flesh Asterisk Asterisk and Beast Fong Asterisk Asterisk, and Junpei stared at them, frozen. That skill was useless, nothing more than a weak-kneed scare for anyone not as strong as him. He'd have to make do with the flesh for now, probably nasty as it looked. But then the last drop stopped him cold. The Beast Fong card throbbed with blinding light. Then, when the glow died down, a razor-sharp Fong snapped into existence in his palm. Junpei's faces jolted from pure exhaustion to calm, quiet satisfaction as he flipped the Fong over, judging its heft and razor edge like it was made for the moment, an unstoppable makeshift blade. Far away, deep inside the god's headquarters, the deity watching him suddenly went still, because it hit him like a hammer. He'd forgotten to tell Junpei how to use the box. Panic erupted as he snapped Jenny and ordered her to rush to Junpei and explain it, fast, before it all went too late. Jenny froze, terrified that one step toward him could spell her doom, yet the god only tossed her a vague, useless answer. His focus drifted to her appearance, and he couldn't help chuckling at how wildly she looked in that getup. At the same time, Junpei shot a grimace and snapped into words, because that taste stuck in his mouth like a curse, and rage burned over whoever dared claim beetles were edible. Then he shoved through the door and pushed onto the next floor. He scanned his surroundings with laser focus. Everything looked wrong, unfamiliar, and yet weirdly quiet, like the previous floors but off in some crucial way. Then he spotted the safe zone and stopped cold. Wait, could this whole floor be a safe zone? No enemies anywhere, and that silence felt way too wrong. Right when his thoughts were taking over, a woman suddenly showed up in front of him out of nowhere, and he jerked back. Every muscle in his body went tight on instinct. She just stared at him in silence, muttering under her breath like she was verifying that it really was him. Junpei stayed razor-focused, tracking every move she made. Then she spoke his name with a stiff, ceremonial tone that felt way too official. Without thinking, he hit his appraisal ability and got nothing. She wasn't a monster, just a human, at least that's what it looked like, though her outfit screamed, not ordinary. She stepped forward and introduced herself as Cheney, just a servant under the god who'd been keeping a close eye on Junpei. Her voice dripped with respect and venom when she talked about her master, a twisted, rotten creature in every sense. Junpei snapped back before she could go on, and his patience started to run out. Cheney promised she'd keep his reaction locked up, insisting what they said would stay secret, and Junpei hurried to make it clear her insults weren't coming from him. Then, after a quick breath to steady himself, he snapped the talk back to the real issue. Cheney revealed she'd shown up to drop off a missing piece of his tutorial. She shot her hand up and summoned a box out of nowhere, right into Medea, floating there in eerie silence, glowing faintly as if it had a pulse. Then she told him the secret. He could call one up the same way, because it was his own personal storage space that could stash and pull out anything he got. She told him everyone in this world carried a box, its shape and size hooked to their magic power, and if you had enough strength, you could cram almost anything inside, even living creatures. But she warned him, you can't just stuff an unwilling target in there, no matter how strong you are. If Junpei wanted monsters, he'd have to subdue them first. And as she spoke, Junpei replayed every word in his head. He tried to summon his own box, and instantly, a twin showed up right in front of him, floating in silence and faintly shimmering in the dim light, like it knew his name. He stared hard and the truth hit him. It was his. He couldn't help thinking, could this thing do more than store stuff, maybe even become a weapon? Cheney shot back that whether it could be used that way depended on the user's imagination and raw power, but most of the time, it was just a storage tool. She wrapped up the tutorial and asked if he had any more questions. Junpei paused, almost itching to ask about her weird outfit, then swallowed it and held back. He fired back with a curt answer, and Cheney's face tightened the second she felt his stare, like he was checking her out where he had no right to. She shoved the thought aside fast, told herself it was nothing, and declared her job done. She declared she was out, then vanished in a blink, just cold silence left in her wake. Junpei let out a heavy breath and rubbed his temples, totally drained. The whole run-in had been infuriating. He muttered that her attitude fit that crazy deity's servant to a T. Right as he was about to head out, something on the ground snagged his eyes. A letter. He snatched it up and rolled it in his hand, then the surface flickered, and boom, the very same man surfaced from inside it. He greeted Junpei like they'd been best friends forever, all fake bright and teasing, bragging about Junpei's earlier showdown with Cerberus and how he'd bolted in fear. Then he leaned in and smirked. This floor isn't like the rest, people actually live here. Junpei's brows knitted tight because the moment those words landed, his whole head started spinning. In the letter, the man's image kept talking, claiming the whole floor acted like a safe zone, because the people who'd survived the near-death chaos up above chose to stay here, make quiet lives, and finally live in peace. A quiet haven for anyone sick of fighting every day. Then he fires off a question, daring Junpei to do the same. The valley is dotted with little villages, so if he wants he can pick one, move in, and spend the rest of his life hidden away in peace. Junpei stayed locked in silence, eyes drifting somewhere far away, and the man, like he already knew, kept talking. He insisted Junpei would keep climbing, that someone like him who hated company and craved solitude would never stop at this point. Junpei only managed a tiny, shaky smile as he breathed out. Then the man's presence started to glitch and fade, his voice thinning out as he said goodbye. He promised they'd meet again, if fate would allow it. Then the message shattered and vanished into thin air. Junpei froze, stunned, replaying every word in his head. Under his breath, he finally got it. The weird goddess wasn't staying on this floor after all. Just then, a sharp movement stole his attention. From far off, a woman stood there, staring right at him. Her sudden presence yanked his focus. Wait, was another woman here? Who was she, and was she one of those villagers the man had talked about? She flashed a big wave at him, calling out like they'd known each other for years, her smile bright and her energy buzzing. Curiosity sparked in her eyes as she said, he had to be coming from the upper levels. Junpei snapped back with a short answer, confirming her hunch, and then he leaned in, asking who she was, all guarded and careful. She flashed a warm smile and introduced herself as Katerina, living in a nearby village tucked right inside the valley, and the way she greeted him felt real, friendly, and inviting. Junpei froze for a second, then awkwardly blurted his name again as a proper intro. Katerina's face melted into a sweet smile, repeating it softly like they'd known each other for years. Meanwhile, Junpei's stomach twisted, because sure, it was a village, which meant real people were actually living here. She seemed kind enough, but he wouldn't drop his guard, not when the last normal thing he met was that deranged deity servant. This woman still felt refreshingly less terrifying. Then out of nowhere, Katerina blurted a request that froze Junpei mid-breath. Her sudden tone knocked the wind out of him. Before he could even react, her next words landed even harder. A blunt, shameless clarification that left him utterly speechless. His thoughts went blank, his body locked up, and for one long moment, all he could do was stare. He slammed a hand to his forehead, exasperation pouring through him as disbelief spun like a storm in his head. Seriously, had every woman on earth lost her mind? Katerina just gave him an awkward little smile and waved off her earlier words, but the moment she started to talk, her voice turned heavy. She swore her request wasn't some joke, something bad was happening, and she was desperate. The teasing warmth drained from her face. Then she looked at him and said, "Walk with me. I'll explain everything on the way." Junpei stayed on edge, but he still nodded and agreed on the spot. No more delays. Katerina breathed out a quiet thank you, and when she turned away, the light in her face faded fast, replaced by a heavy, shadowed look, as if whatever truth she was about to drop was dragging something dark into the open. Chapter 7 begins. The woman introduced herself as Katrina. She lived in a small village nestled within the valley. She greeted him warmly and offered to show him around. Katrina told me her village started with just a tiny crew of people, and over the years it swelled to around 50, locked away so tight that all she truly knew was life inside their own walls. Anything beyond the village felt like a sealed mystery to her. She snapped him down to her side and whispered, "Get low," and as they hid together, Katrina told him the rumors she'd heard, that when people tied the knot with their close relatives, the kids sometimes came into the world with horrifying deformities. Junpei wondered if she was talking about recessive genetic mutations from inbreeding, and Katrina shot back that with barely any outsiders, just random passing adventurers. The villagers had no choice but to go hunting for them just to reproduce. Junpei caught her meaning instantly and shot back with a sharp call-out. He demanded to know what was happening, and then a bunch of goblins slid into view, while both of them stayed buried in the shadows. Katrina snapped that this hunt was the only way they'd survive. Junpei grumbled under his breath, convinced, based on what he'd seen, that these goblins were just run-of-the-mill monsters, and then Katrina shot up her hand to call the attack. Then she leaned in and told them that this whole floor was meant to be a safe. Even with the safety zone up, monsters still clawed their way in, and she swore it was because its power got stretched across that massive area, so the protection thinned out and let even the weaker monsters slip through. And that's how those creatures turned into a vital meal for the villagers. One of the men lunged ahead and hacked at a goblin, but it twisted out of the way with freaky, shocking speed. And with a brutal swing, it slashed its sword across the man's arm as it struck back. Junpei stared at the wound and knew it looked brutal, but Katrina stayed stone calm and told him it was nothing, because here, recovery hits weak, yet it'll still hold the line long enough to keep him alive. She said she was about to bait even more monsters, then shot Junpei a question. What did he plan to do? He stared back at her and it hit him. She'd set the whole thing up on purpose, and she confessed it on the spot. No hesitation, just truth, saying she wanted to test just how strong his seed really was. He had no good reason to indulge her, but curiosity burned. He wanted to see just how tough the local monsters really were. Moments later, blood-curdling screams ripped through the forest. Junpei had already wiped out the goblins in a flash. In just a few seconds, everyone was wiped out. Katrina burst into applause, gushing that he was incredible, then sweet-talked him as her dear husband, and Junpei finally let out a deep, tired sigh. Then Katrina closed the distance, her voice suddenly turning sharp. She bragged that his lineage was so powerful nobody stood a chance, and teased that once the hunt was over, they should get intimate. Before Junpei could even blink, a man behind them cut in, saying the rest of the work would be left to Katrina. And Katrina just shrugged, casually agreeing. Junpei's cheeks burned red as Katrina charged in on the slaying goblins. Then she snapped on her skill, *butcher****. Her hand blazed with light as she tore through the corpses, one after another, with ruthless precision. Each time she slammed the skill, Item cards burst into existence, carpeting the ground all around her. Junpei stared in disbelief, shocked at how much meat those kills had spat out. Katrina just shrugged it off like it was her job, and Junpei stayed quiet while she kept working. She said their village lived off crops, but without meat they'd crash from a brutal lack of protein. Those monster hunts, she insisted, were the only thing keeping everyone alive and healthy. Katrina admitted that, even though everyone drilled protein into her since she was a kid, she never really grasped what it meant. Until years later, when she sharpened her butcher skill all the way to ultra grade, where she could pinpoint exactly what she wanted to pull out with it. Junpei sank into deep thought while she talked, and the truth hit hard. Our village didn't have a single real source of protein. No animals, no edible plants, not even insects. Without that nasty monster meat, everyone would have wasted away into malnutrition long ago, and honestly, it sounded like a living nightmare. Then Katrina's voice shattered his thoughts as she asked, right there, what his status was. So Junpei didn't hesitate and showed her immediately. The instant his stats flashed on screen, Katrina and the other villagers snapped into stunned silence, like the whole world just hit pause. Katrina muttered that his skills were wildly lopsided, and Junpei shot back that he'd placed every point on purpose, after weighing a ton of factors. She pointed out that his build was all speed, then pressed him in a low voice on what he'd done to cover defense. Just as he opened his mouth to answer, she snapped onto his arm, hard. Junpei blinked, utterly lost, and Katrina stayed cool as ice, declaring her base attack power was 80, basically telling him he had no way to wriggle out. Right when he tried to react, a punch slammed into him from behind, and darkness started swallowing his vision. He caught Katrina's voice drifting through the haze. She thanked him and basically told him he'd saved her from having to drug his meal. Junpei lunged to activate his appraisal skill, but the moment the incantation started, his vision went dark, and he passed out cold. A window flickered open for a split second, then the valley villager's danger level flashed, and it read, normal humans. When he jolted awake, he found himself trapped in a basement, air so thick with a metallic reek of blood that it burned his nose, while the walls stared back at him, packed wall-to-wall with butcher's tools of every wild shape and size. Heavy chains clenched around his arms and legs, and a cheerful voice echoed through the dark room. Katrina welcomed him with a bright grin, asking how he liked their brand new home, and as she grabbed her gear from the nearby table, the blades clinked with a sharp, electric sound that snapped the silence. Junpei's eyes blew wide as the truth hit. Katrina apologized for grabbing him, promised she'd let him go in no time, and Junpei clenched his teeth, rage and fear wrestling in his chest. Then she let out a quick laugh, acting way too proud for comfort, and asked him what she was planning to do to him. Katrina's grin never wavered as she reminded him of her earlier jab about the village running short on protein, and June's face hardened in an instant. She lunged for the butcher's knife and declared that from this moment on, everything depended on him to fill the gap in their nourishment, his seed, his flesh, whatever it was, because not a single drop would be wasted on him. She told him they'd take care of him for the rest of his life, and a sharp flicker of fear flashed across his face. Then she pushed on, saying they'd start with his legs, one could regrow while they pulled the other. Those words from his earlier appraisal slammed into his thoughts, and suddenly everything sounded like it was made to feed them. He grimly knew now, that warning hadn't been an exaggeration. Katrina snapped that this was inside a safe zone, so even if he got his 4 limbs ripped off, his body would just regrow, and as long as they kept him, the villagers would always have a steady supply of fresh meat. With a chilling calm, she said that now he was here, they didn't need the weaker men to breed anymore. Those men would get carved up for food, and the old would finally be released from their suffering. Without so much as a pause, Katrina drove the butcher knife straight down onto Juimp's leg, then agony detonated through him and blood sprayed across the floor. With a sugary grin, she chirped about how thrilled she was to have such a young, strong husband. Then she lifted the blade again and slammed it into his leg, and his screams ricocheted through the dark chamber. Katrina spoke in a soft, almost tender voice, telling him it had to hurt, then apologizing as she urged him to hang on just a little longer. Monster meat wasn't enough to feed the whole crew, she snapped, then she left them with no choice at all. When she wrapped up her work, she lit up and blurted, "I'm finished," and promised a banquet to celebrate his arrival, then grinned wide and vowed she'd whip up a killer soup with the ingredients she'd grabbed. Katrina swore his legs would grow back in about 10 days. Then, since one was already gone, she ordered his hands freed too, insisting he couldn't escape with just one leg. She even promised she'd take good care of her dear husband, but Junpei never answered. He just stared at her, stone-cold silent. Katrina then told him that after the banquet, they'd steal the night together, and even though she'd never had a child, she insisted she knew the ropes down to the act itself, urging him to loosen up, trust his body to her, and let go, swearing she'd give him the wildest, greatest night of his life. With a sharp motion, she freed his wrists from the restraints and declared she was stepping out for now. Junpei shot her a razor-sharp glare, and for one heartbeat Katrina's bright smile vanished, leaving her eyes hollow and blank, before she leaned in and whispered that deep down, they all knew the outside world would brand their actions unforgivable. But they never saw forgiveness coming, not from him. She just needed him to get one thing. This was their only shot at surviving. Junpei kept staring at her, frozen in place. As fragments of his past battles slammed back into his mind, every brutal fight, every desperate bid to survive, every shred of will that refused to break. Katrina gave a small, shaky smile and apologized again and again, praying, somehow, that they could still learn to get along. He said nothing, but inside he knew. Every single one of them was shattered in their own unique way, their minds twisted and warped by despair. And still he understood the twisted logic behind their madness. When all hope died, they just grabbed the one path that let them keep living, even if it looked doomed from the outside. Standing in their shoes, he couldn't help wondering whether he'd have made the same choice if he'd been born into that kind of despair. Maybe some tiny chance still flickered in his mind that they could finally understand each other. Then, right before he turned to go, Katrina's voice softened. She'd see him later. Junpei shot out a call, starting to say something about his flesh. But the words choked in his throat as he watched her stare at his wounded leg, her eyes half-lidded, burning with nade, a slick thread of drool shining at the edge of her mouth. Disgust and disbelief pulled his brows tight, and when Katrina spun back toward him, her voice slipped into that sweet, homey calm as she cooed. "What's wrong, dear?" Junpei dropped his eyes and muttered that it was nothing. She needed him to finally get it. This was their one shot at surviving. So she swallowed her pride, apologized, and begged for peace between them. And Junpei, alone in that dim room, couldn't stop replaying Katrina's words. Half a day had already slithered by since she vanished, and nobody showed up to check on him. So the suffocating silence crushed in, and he snapped his focus to the books scattered all over the room. The titles shouted goblins, ogres, and slimes, and when he skimmed the pages, he realized they weren't stories at all. They were breeding logs, like the villagers were desperate to domesticate monsters. The books mapped how these creatures lived, but with every experiment, every breeding attempt, it all ended in failure. Junpei couldn't stop wondering, were there still any breeding facilities out there nearby? If there were, then some of those villagers must have already had the exact know-how to run them. And if those logs were telling the truth, he couldn't help but wonder, then maybe these creatures were exactly what they needed to become weapons. He pushed himself up from the chair, gripped a stick for support, and muttered that it was finally time to find out what happened to the villagers, because enough time had already passed. Sweat dripped down his forehead as he limped toward the staircase, and every single step felt like a fight. When he finally burst through the doorway and into the hall, everything felt like it was about to change. His gaze snapped to a body sprawled across the floor, dead, cold, and beyond saving. Then he snapped his head around, and there was more death everywhere. The whole dining hall was covered in corpses, with villagers sprawled out lifeless where they'd dropped. Junpei flashed a sly grin to himself. Yep, it was exactly how he'd pictured it. Then, like a whisper tearing through the quiet, a faint, trembling sound slipped out, soft as a hay deer's cry. Junpei spun around and there was Katrina, lying on the ground. She was still breathing, barely. He snapped that if she'd survived, it was because she barely ate right. Katrina rasped out that she'd been cooking, so the poisoned meat didn't get much of a bite into her at all. Junpei went silent for a heartbeat. Then Katrina, barely able to get the words out, whispered, "Did you poison your own flesh? How could someone even pull that off?" Junpei snapped at her that she was wrong, because his own body was poison, every inch packed with a toxin so deadly, it could drop even mythological monsters. He said one bite was all it took to end a normal human, and using him like meat was exactly the mistake that got them killed. Katrina gritted her teeth, and her face twisted like she couldn't decide between searing pain and total disbelief. Then she let out a shaky little laugh, eyes burning as she demanded, "Why us? We fought tooth and nail just to stay alive. And this is what we get." Junpei stays stone calm and silent, but deep down, no matter what, something soft flickers in his chest, a real, trembling bit of pity. Katrina's gaze slid away mid-sentence, and as she kept going, she blurted out that maybe this was what happened after they'd started eating human flesh. Was it divine punishment, or did cannibalism really rank so evil that it deserved an ending like this? Junpei dropped to his knees beside her, face locked tight, then snapped that she was wrong again. "Eating humans had no consequences at all," he said in a low voice. But his words cut sharper as he went on. Maybe he shouldn't have claimed it, yet the truth was plain. The reason everyone they killed still ended up dead. It wasn't sin, and it wasn't divine punishment. They were just too weak. Katrina's eyes went wide with raw shock at the sound of his words. Junpei kept going, insisting that was the only answer that actually fit, and even then he admitted he'd learned a ton from her. Katrina stared back at him, steady, but with a twitch of nerves in her eyes. She finally breathed out that she understood everything now. Even someone who knew nothing about the outside world could still wrap her mind around that truth. Then in the gentlest whisper, she called out to him one final time, dear. Her whole body froze mid-breath, and with a trembling whisper, she choked out one last apology before the world went silent. And then her breath vanished for good. Junpei clenched his jaw so hard it felt like it might crack. He stared down at her lifeless form and muttered that now was enough. She could finally rest. Then with a quiet voice, he leaned in and praised, "Good job, Katrina." Junpei carefully laid his hand on Katrina's head. Then he spun away from her body, like he couldn't bear to look anymore, and rushed up to one of the fallen villagers, dropping to his knees beside the cold corpse. He pressed his palm to it, whispered, "Butcher, activate," and the air flickered, faint light spilling out as a skill card popped into existence right in front of him. Junpei flicked it a quick glance, muttered no, and sprinted to the next body, slamming the skill again. A new card popped out, and still it wasn't the one he was chasing. He kept moving corpse to corpse, repeating the same command over and over until the floor was chaos, hundreds of cards strewn everywhere like dead leaves. None of them hit the mark. His face tightened and his patience snapped. Then out of nowhere, one card finally caught his eye. He snatched it up, stared it down and smirked hard. Skill card, monster tame, item rank, beginner. Bingo, he breathed it out like a secret. Now the only thing left was hunting down the perfect monster. Junpei staggered down the corridor, fighting through the pain, until he finally dragged himself into the next room. He slipped inside, eyes razor-sharp, sweeping every shadowed corner, and the whole air felt unnervingly still. He muttered under his breath, scanning for where it was, where the creature might be lurking. Then, in the dim light, something flashed and snatched his attention. Plastered against the far wall, a huge jar sat sealed tight as a drum. Junpei strode over, dropped into a crouch, and yanked the truth into view. "Found it," he said. He yanked off the lid, and inside was a glowing, translucent puddle of pure slime. Something quivered weakly in the container like it was alive. Junpei's mouth stretched into a huge grin. The contents were still flawless, untouched by contamination, unmessed by decay. He thought, "They're just like me, the weakest life forms around, and that's why they can evolve the hardest." Then he swore he'd turn those slimes into lethal weapons, plain-looking, easy to ignore, and absolutely unstoppable. Junpei leaned in and whispered. Then a glowing cube burst into the air in front of him, shimmering softly like it was alive. He commanded the slimes to surge inside, and the squishy blobs obediently oozed in like they'd been waiting for orders. As they disappeared into the storage box, a smug grin tugged at his face. Then once his leg fully regenerated and his next experiments were ready, he promised himself he'd finally get out of this place. A glowing window snapped into view before Carter Junpei's eyes, displaying level 638, and he just froze there, staring, silent. Then it hit him, survival in this twisted dungeon meant becoming twisted too. He swore he'd stay alive, no matter how warped everything around him got. And with that vow, Junpei spun around and started down again, diving into the dark unknown. Then one last icy thought slammed into his head, and I have to kill them. Meanwhile, way up at the god's headquarters, Hidari leaned in toward the divine mirror and grinned like he'd just won, then whispered to himself, "All right, he's finally grown into someone worth watching." He spun toward the goddess Chenny, and demanded to know how Junpei's meeting made her feel, and she answered in a soft voice that she honestly didn't have a clue. But that's what hit her. She couldn't help but think of Hidari himself, and Hidari just erupted into loud, booming laughter. "What the hell is she saying?" he blurted, still laughing. Yeah, okay, he couldn't lie, he loved it. Chenny didn't add a word, her face tightened and her eyes went razor-sharp. Then Hidari's voice crashed in like thunder, like it could bend the sky itself. "Now set forth. Keep digging deeper into this dark, grisly dungeon of pure madness, if you dare." Then right inside his thoughts, a hushed whisper slid in, meant for Junpei alone. "Keep going, entertain me more, take to Junpei-kun." Junpei slowed on the path, sinking into deep thought while that suffocating dungeon quiet crushed his nerves. Because he knew the only way to survive in this nightmare was to get just as twisted, toughening his will to match every brutal thing the dungeon threw at him. Junpei reminded himself he wasn't done. He'd prove how much he could survive it all. With that iron resolve blazing in his chest, he stood in front of the massive, looming door, feeling the next trial bear down on him like a storm about to break. He muttered under his breath as he studied the frame, bracing for whatever the next door had in store, or the horrors lurking on the other side. The second he stepped inside, thousands of knights surged into view, armor clashing as they formed a towering wall of steel. Junpei snapped into shock, his thoughts tripping, disbelief blasting across his face. He stared at them, frozen in shock, armored knights, a whole swarm of humans, and then it hit him like a punch. Oh no. He snapped a warning to himself. Knowing this was trouble the second, the knights surged in, deadly precise, swords whipping through the air as they crashed forward to kill. Junpei barely dodged at the last second, slipping out of their reach and letting their blades slice the air inches from him. Then he snapped back into position and instantly triggered his appraisal. The Rhindal Imperial Army, once human soldiers, now carried danger ratings from D to C, but as a whole they were flagged S+, and then a space-time distortion yanked them into this dungeon, stripping away their sanity until all that remained were monsters with terrifying intelligence. Junpei cursed under his breath, furious that they kept piling in from every side, and they charged him again. His eyes snapped across the chaos, begging his body to locate the safe zone, and then, right in the distance, he caught a glowing barrier. Relief slammed into him the moment he realized he'd found it. Without even a second thought, he launched into a full sprint toward it, dodging and weaving through the knights as their blades smashed and rang out all around him. One clean, lightning-fast strike was all it took to drop the first knight, and then he hit the same ruthless, endless rhythm. One by one, the next enemies dropped, each defeat landing with sharp, flawless precision as he hacked his way forward. Finally, he slipped into the safe zone, and the knights immediately froze mid-swing, like someone snapped their strings. Junpei stared at the motionless figure wrapped around him and let out a long, bone-tired sigh. Then he spotted a letter at his side, crouched to grab it, and couldn't stop wondering why it was there too. The man burst out of the letter like he always does, chaos in every step, waving him off with casual cheer, drowning their unlucky reunion in a laugh, and calling it yet another curse, then flat out insisting the enemy on this floor is an entire army. He kept going, saying that if Junpei wanted a real shodan, then to take on an army, he'd need an army just as strong at his side. Junpei's brows snapped tighter, and you could practically see the irritation blazing across his face. He kept going, guessing Junpei was banking on long-range blasts, or chucking attacks from inside the safe zone, but that plan was doomed, because their magicians could throw up defensive shields strong enough to stop anything he tried. So the man dropped his answer straight into the narration, no sugarcoating, and Junpei's only real move was to bolt, because that age-old trick always worked. He admitted with a sharp, bitter laugh that he once thought he could live by running for long enough to get experience, then picking fights with weaker mobs, but this time there weren't any weaker targets to grind, so Junpei's level never budged from the instant he walked in. The guy basically told him, "Run, at least in your spirit," and Junpei just froze, hit hard by the crushing disappointment. Then the man whipped out a flying carpet, and with full showmanship, unveiled it to everyone as he bragged about how he once rode it through the sky, right above threats just like the ones looming now. He told me he'd been a famous adventurer out there, so of course he had a whole pocketful of handy tools. And then, with one last dramatic flourish, he bolted. June stumbled away, utterly shocked, and left alone all over again. Junpei muttered that even this weird guy looked like he was running out of time. But right now, worrying about everyone else wasn't an option. Junpei spun toward the huge army and muttered through a steady breath, thinking, if they're marching in with numbers, then good news. I've got an army backing me up too. A confident smirk snapped onto his face as he called his box to him. The lid creaked open and the slimes burst out in a raging flood, surging forward with restless, unstoppable energy. The knights dug in, tense as steel, bracing for impact, while Junpei's grin stretched even wider. He snapped an order from within, commanding his slimes to surge in and attack. Without hesitation, the slimes exploded forward. Some crashed into the knight's armor, clinging tight as they hissed and spit. While everyone else surged onto the enemy magician like a pack, the mage panicked, then blasted a wall of flames, torching several slimes in a brutal burst of scorching heat. Junpei clicked his tongue with quiet irritation, watching their fire magic singe a bunch of his slimes, still under control, but definitely a pain in the ass. The knights snarled as slime kept coming without pause, and their formation started to crack under the relentless onslaught. While everything spiraled into chaos, Junpei just dropped into a seat and mumbled that this fight was going to drag on, so he might as well nap. After a while, Junpei jolted awake, stretched every muscle, and let out this huge yawn like nothing in the world could touch his peace. He pushed himself to his feet, raised his mug, and took a slow, savoring sip of coffee. He muttered to himself that stealing supplies from the village was the smartest move, and he still couldn't wrap his head around it. Coffee beans of all things. Yeah, he thought, letting out a small, smug satisfaction. Junpei stepped outside the safe zone, scanned the battlefield, and realized every last knight and magician had been wiped out completely. Junpei muttered that the last slimes would finally get to chow down on a meal they truly earned. Blindly, the slimes spilled out of the box and tore into the corpses, chewing through everything with cold, methodical hunger. Junpei told himself he'd finally unleash the few thousand slimes he'd been raising with his toxic blood, then watch them swarm the floor and spread the poison everywhere. The end was unavoidable. Every soul that once breathed in this place got wiped out, and now all that's left is nothing, not even a trace. No serving, no hope, no after it. Junpei watched these new baby slimes get fed, and just took it all in with ice-cold acceptance. The slimes twitched, swelled, and ballooned in size. Then he barked a silent command: feast, multiply, and grow their numbers. His dear pandemic slimes, he thought it with a wicked, dark smirk. Hidari watched the chaos unfold with a sharp grin, stunned that Junpei had actually busted out of the tragic fate that was supposed to swallow him. Because in this world, where death waits around every corner, surviving at all is straight up unreal. A smirk tugged at Hidari's face as he thought. Junpei was stubborn in the strangest, funniest way, and deep down, Hidari could feel the whole situation slipping out of control. Filled with burning curiosity, Hidari finally decided to go straight to the dungeon where Junpei was trapped, desperate to see what the escalating mess was really turning into. Right then, Junpei dropped to the ground and stared at his status window, the soft glow lighting up his face like a spotlight. He muttered to himself as he scanned his stats. When he finally clocked it, he was level 818 now. Memories hit him hard. The master swordsman outside was only level 300. Junpei told himself he wasn't trying to show off, but with power like this, he'd surely rank among the strongest out in the real world. Taking out those bastards would be nothing but an easy, effortless win. Still, he forced himself to pause, because first he had to figure out how to escape this dungeon before he did anything else. Junpei's thoughts snapped to a stop, the second footstep slammed closer in the passage, and a nearby voice groaned that this was a letdown. So Junpei ducked and hid instantly. One of the guys snapped out loud, fuming and asking what was even going on with this dungeon. How could there be no enemies anywhere after all that walking? The other shot back, annoyed, saying he had no clue, and blaming the first guy for being the one who pushed for them to come here. The group kept talking, and every word made the air feel weirder, especially when they brought up that empty village they'd just passed, and a nasty chill started crawling up their spines. Junpei narrowed his eyes, his mind racing. What the hell was happening? And were these guys real adventurers or just trouble in disguise? Then bam, a face he knew instantly snapped into view. Junpei's mind jolted with pure shock when he finally clocked the guy, Sakakibara Kanzuya, a member of Kaido's gang, and Kanzuya's face slammed back into his memory with terrifying clarity. He couldn't stop wondering why Kanzuya was stuck in this dungeon too. Then his mind sprinted to questions, who the rest of these creeps even were, and where Kito and Noriko had gone. But right then, he snapped at himself for wasting time thinking any of it. With the answers sitting right there, he didn't need to think. He just had to ask, and a sly smirk slowly crept across his lips. Later, the men huddled around a crackling fire, and one of them gloated as he relived it. Every memory sparked a twisted grin, while Kanzuya snorted and nodded along with a sneer. One of the men remembered it. Those S-rank adventurers barely scraped through a high-difficulty quest. But somehow, these guys only came across them while they were limping back, half dead and barely hanging on. It was like a free feast, dropped straight into their hands. The man smirked like he'd already won as he said there was only one way out: kill them. With sick delight, he bragged that the S-rank spearmen had the nerve to sneer at them, then promised they'd make him regret ever looking down. They shattered his arms and legs, and dragged him into a slow, brutal torture. He leaned back with a smug grin, serving the man exactly what he deserved. The older man flashed a sinister smirk and then dropped the bombshell. Turns out the spearman's sister wasn't just anyone, she'd been a sage. But even after burning through every last ounce of strength, she still couldn't fight the urge. They broke her in every way, abusing and torturing her, then shoved her spearman brother into the corner and forced him to watch every single second. The old man leaned in and bragged that the sizzling, crackling sensation of plunging them straight through the head was the greatest high he'd ever had. Only his sister topped it. Another man nodded hard, bragging that the massacre showered them with a crazy pile of experience points, and now every single one of them was over level 200. Kanzuya grinned with pride and declared, "And we're S-ranks too." The men blared with wild, manic confidence, swaggering like they had more than enough to back it up. They weren't scared anymore, just sick of stomping on helpless female adventurers, and they craved real thrills, hunting for treasure inside the dungeon and cashing in their new legend. The moment Junpei spotted them in the distance, the men burst into laughter. His face soured into a grim mask as he muttered to himself, replaying every detail, and deciding it all was just human scum. Junpei was convinced they'd come for him the second he showed up in the open. He seethed at the thought that Kanzuya was just like the rest of these degenerates, grinning and strolling around like he'd stumbled onto a sick little vacation. And now he couldn't stop wondering whether Kanzuya got split from Kito and Noriko. The old man warned, no reason to step into that cracked dungeon, and the other guy nodded hard, saying even with their unstoppable strength, they weren't dumb enough to chase death in a place like that. Junpei furrowed his brow, completely stumped by what they were saying. Then Kanzuya leaned in and swore to them, "Trust me, this isn't some crummy cracked dungeon." He told them he'd already spotted that dungeon entrance once before and knew the exact spot where it sat, but the old man waved him off as if Kanzuya was just playing around, until Kanzuya snapped back, dead serious. He then admitted he'd spotted someone he knew stepping into that dungeon, only their stats were shockingly low, even lower than anyone they'd ever laid eyes on before. Kanzuya grinned with full confidence, Junpei had to be dead by now. Junpei froze for a second, letting their words hit him, because it sounded like they'd just found a whole new way into the cracked dungeon, and deep down, he knew it wasn't luck at all. Some wild dimensional distortion had shoved their paths together. He said this dungeon wasn't just miraculous, it was outright chaos, where time and space lurched and snapped at random. And honestly, when it had already eaten an army of thousands, a couple measly parties felt like small change. Junpei decided he'd wipe them all out, except that one little bastard, because somehow he thought he'd let him live. He reminded himself that whoever lands the first hit wins every fight. Then he leaned back against a rock, ready for anything. A sly smirk slid onto his face, like he already knew how this would end. As he stared at the ceiling, panicking over one brutal truth, every one of the four of them was already over level 200. Meanwhile, the old man erupted in curses, snapping that he didn't care what dungeon it was, and then he slammed the point home. Now that they'd come this far, they weren't walking out empty-handed. Someone asked, what would you do if those other adventurers already grabbed all the treasure? And the next guy snapped back like it was obvious, I'd kill them and take it. Then he added, and leave the girls to me first, I'm not into corpses. Suddenly, a pair of feet staggered into the firelight. Then Kanzuya mumbled that it was finally time to move, but his words died the moment a whole new presence showed up. Wrapped in bandages, Junpei staggered out in front of them, and he mumbled a shaky apology to the whole group. One of the men snapped with rage, barking, what I want, where is it? Junpei answered in a soft, timid voice, saying he'd been running around with his buddies in these parts and begging these kind sirs to point him to the way out. For a split second, the men went quiet. Then Kanzuya finally broke the silence and offered a deal. Show you the way, sure, but you hand over every coin and treasure. Junpei stayed respectful, thanked them, and admitted the brutal truth. He didn't have much on him at all. While the chaos brewed, one of the men leaned close to Kanzuya and hissed, what do we do with this newcomer? Kanzuya shrugged like it did matter. Use him as a meat shield, or just kill him along the way. Then another voice hissed that they'd already stayed here too long and needed to turn back, because with some brat running wild, that old man swore the treasure was probably all gone. Then the whole crew pinned Junpei with cold, threatening stares, so the old man snapped at him to show them what he had. Junpei nodded right away, falling in line and promising he'd do exactly what they demanded. Then out of nowhere, Junpei surged forward and slammed a punch straight into the man's eyes. Blood burst through the air, then a horrifying, even heavier gush followed, spilling from the man's shattered eyes. The others went stone still, stunned into silence. Then Junpei snapped ice cold that he was going to make these scum regret crossing him. The old man grabbed his head and screamed in pure agony, blood bursting out of him like his body was ripping apart. Kanzuya and another man slammed toward Junpei just as he clenched his weapon tighter. And with a smooth, lightning-fast twist, he slipped every attack like it was never even coming. In a blink, Junpei slipped in behind the man and hissed a deadly plan straight into his head. He lunged his dagger forward, but the man yanked it back with a last-second counter. Juin's eyes blew wide with shock at that sudden reversal. A burst of light snapped between them, and he instinctively stumbled back to create space from the whole group. He couldn't help admitting to himself that going straight at them was gonna be a fight. This was his first real brawl against humans, and his lack of experience was already biting hard, but there was no time to change it now. He let out a long, crushing sigh that felt like it weighed a ton. A smug smirk crawled onto his lips as he got himself ready. All right, it was time to kick this show into gear. Junpei stood before the adventurers, and the pressure of the moment pinned him to the spot like an invisible storm. He scanned the situation in his head. 4 enemies stood against him. One of them was already dropped by his poison, and the lifeless body sat there like a silent warning of how ruthless he was. So he told himself he had to keep one of them alive for later. So right now, his only real threat came down to the last 2 standing right in front of him. Junpei pinned them with a cold, razor-sharp stare, his eyes slicing through the tension like a threat meant to end. The last men dug in, fists tight and bodies coiled, all of them hunting for that one split-second opening to pounce the moment he faltered. One of the men leaned in and hissed to the others, demanding they shield him as he charged up an S-grade spell, so brutal it would erase Junpei, turning him into nothing but burning cinders across the dungeon floor. A colossal magic circle erupted overhead, flooding the battlefield with a terrifying glow like the sky itself was warning them of doom. Junpei stood frozen on edge, shoulders tense and eyes locked, feeling the heat crawl over his skin, while the attack hadn't even fully taken shape yet. The spellcaster ripped open the sky and called forth the ancient fire phoenix, and with a violent blast of flames, a monstrous, blazing phoenix crashed toward Junpei. Junpei just grinned, equal parts defiance and pure madness, while the heat erupted around him, and his body shook hard under the relentless blaze. In those searing seconds, it hit him. This wasn't just heat. It was a giant, unstoppable blast with nowhere to hide. Even if he sprinted, dodging was hopeless. Trapped in the corner, he demanded, "What am I even supposed to do now?" Junpei clenched his fists so hard his knuckles looked ready to crack. Then he dropped into a low crouch, threw his arms up to protect his face, and without thinking twice, let out a reckless, stubborn vow to take the hit and stand his ground, no matter what it cost. A blazing phoenix swallowed him in a roaring inferno, but Junpei jammed his feet into the ground and refused to move. Pain like fire kept ripping through Junpei's body, and one of the men finally blurted, "Did we kill him?" Junpei clenched his teeth and pushed through the agony, because he'd pumped so many points into HP, and he'd always known the same truth. Someday, survival would come down to raw endurance. When the flames finally died down, that giant phoenix crumbled into smoke, and a heavy, choking cloud hung in the air like a nightmare. Moments later, the smoke finally cleared, and Junpei stood there tall, perfectly alive, untouched, while the heat still clung to his clothes. Junpei's smirk snapped into place the moment it clicked. He was alive, barely. His HP had somehow clung to the line, just enough to keep him standing after a spell that powerful. The men jerked back in horror, freaking out in their heads like, "No way, that bastard is still breathing." In one lightning-fast burst, Jun launched forward with blinding speed, tore across the battlefield, and cut straight through one of the men before he could even blink. The lone survivor fought to calm his thoughts, convinced Junpei was slipping in from behind for a flank strike. Before anyone could react, Junpei burst back behind them, sliced one man's neck clean with a single arc, then snapped his gun straight at the last target. Realizing way too late that he wasn't the target, the first man's panic exploded, and without a second thought, he yanked his trigger. Both men crumpled to the ground, gone in an instant, their bodies hitting the floor with brutal thuds that echoed through the empty, barren chamber. Kanzuya stumbled back in pure shock, mouth hanging open as he gasped at. Horror slammed into his world, as everything unfolded right in front of his eyes. He gaped at his fallen comrades. One had his eyes gouged out, another's throat was ripped wide, and the last lay riddled with bullet wounds. Rage thundered through Kanzuya, but before he could lunge forward, 2 bullets tore into his legs and dropped him dead on the spot. Smoke curled ominously from Junpei's gun, and Kanzuya's scream tore through the air with raw agony. Junpei peeled back his bandage in slow suspense, and with frightening clarity, his face came into view as he faced him head-on, stepping forward with calm malice and snapping straight at Kanzuya, only to watch his eyes blow wide with shock and disbelief. Junpei flashed a grin full of unsettling satisfaction, quietly daring Kanzuya to remember who he was. Recognition hit Kanzuya like a sword to the gut. His face snapped into shock the second he saw that Taikta Junpei was standing right in front of him. Terror crashed over him, his mind buckling under the impossible, as he gawked at how Junpei survived, and what kind of living nightmare he'd turned into. Junpei shoved his panic down with ice-cold certainty, and through the narration he swore he was still alive, and he'd live way longer than those assholes who once tossed him aside. He let out a long, shaky breath, like he'd been holding it for years. Then he muttered, voice heavy with distant emotion, "It's been forever," and Kanzuya jerked back with a sharp, startled gasp. Junpei's face snapped into something colder as he barked, demanding to know exactly how long they'd been keeping him locked in this wretched crack of a dungeon. Kanzuya's eyes went wide with terror as the truth hit. Junpei actually believed this was the crack dungeon. He swore to himself that he had slipped into a whole different world. Before Junpei could finish explaining, a gunshot ripped through the air. He'd already raised his weapon and barked a silent command to shut him up and make him answer clearly. He was desperate to see for himself what zero survivability truly feels like. Kanzuya's hands shook violently, and his mouth fell wide open as pure terror crashed through him. He swallowed hard and looked down, admitting with a shaky voice that he could barely recall it, like maybe 4 or 5 years had slipped by. Junpei's chest went tight when he finally got it. What felt like a month to him had dragged into years for everyone outside, and the time inside this place warped reality until it didn't make sense. He snapped his own thoughts shut and demanded, voice sharp, "Where are Kaido and Noriko?" Kanzuya shook his head, helpless, and swore he had no idea. Kanzuya kept talking. Right after they stepped into the dungeon, they stayed glued together until Kito's level started climbing. His arrogance spiraled into full-blown madness, and everyone around him started trembling with fear. Everyone stared except Noriko, who practically clung to him, while Junpei's eyes darkened like a storm rolling in. Kanzuya kept going, saying he'd ditched them right away, and had zero clue what happened after that. Then he paused like the truth suddenly hit him. Then he finally confessed he'd heard a wild rumor. Right as Junpei was about to spill the truth, the guy he'd already written off as dead suddenly snapped forward from behind. Junpei snapped out of the ambush on instinct, just barely slipping past the blade and wrenching his dagger up to pin the man at the throat. The man swung his strike, and it sailed right past the target, slamming into something it wasn't meant to hit instead. A blade sliced straight through Kanzuya's head, splitting it violently, and blood sprayed across the tree roots. Junpei's eyes blew wide with stunned shock. As both enemies crumpled to the ground, lifeless, side by side, Junpei muttered that he couldn't believe the guy had slipped up on him, so close it felt dangerous, and as he lost both chances at information, he cursed through clenched teeth. Junpei snapped quiet, piecing together every unanswered question he couldn't get out of his head. He muttered through pure frustration, dying to know what that bastard was about to say about Noriko. Then it all vanished, and in the end, he learned absolutely nothing. He let out a long, heavy sigh, convinced that guessing what happened to her was a total dead end. He'd only know once he finally broke out of this labyrinth. Still, something about the whole situation felt wrong. He suddenly realized, crap, he never even poisoned the half-dead attacker from earlier. But the people he poisoned dropped dead on the spot, instantly. A brutal realization hit him. His toxin had mutated into something far deadlier than he ever expected. This poison wasn't merely deadly, it was downright monstrous. He knew the dungeon's layout kept warping on him. Floors flipped and shifted in total chaos, with no warning. But what he saw those guys do, every different dungeon entrance he tried, dumped him onto a totally different floor. So yeah, this twisted maze wasn't just him. The old man who vanished, only to leave behind a whole storm of messages. He'd have to have lived through the same wild, chaotic distortions. Junpei figured it out in a flash. The old man, or maybe a whole crew, had already wiped out these floors and pushed even deeper into the dungeon. Junpei's faces sank with dread, and he snapped with bitter fury. After all that progress, the survivor count was still sitting at 0. He slipped into deep thought, freezing in place while the dungeon's eerie hum surrounded him. With the odds crushing him, he still vowed. Once he started, there was no turning back, only one way forward. Keep fighting, keep clawing ahead, no matter what. He had no choice but to keep fighting, again and again, throwing everything into his struggle just to claw out one more day of this living nightmare. Junpei spiraled into deep thought, replaying Kanzuya's half-stopped words over and over in his head. If that rumor's real, then Noriko is. But the sentence died mid-sentence, and that broken threat clung to him like a nightmare he couldn't unravel. Junpei's brows knit with pure frustration, and even his calm exterior couldn't hide it anymore, because when it was all said and done, he realized he hadn't actually learned a single useful thing about Kaido or Noriko. So he snapped out a sharp breath and forced himself to stop replaying what he couldn't change and deal with his own problems for now. His eyes slid to the horizon, and he couldn't help wondering what kind of mess was going on with this floor, and what brutal twist the dungeon was about to throw at him next. He perched up high, gripping the moment, and stared out over a massive forest, stretching forever below him like a living sea made of leaves. He scanned the area like a hawk, and realized it felt exactly like that weird village from before, an entire floor turned into a safe zone. Almost, anyway, because one tiny patch of space was still clearly outside the sanctuary's protection. Junpei muttered that he couldn't even summon surprise anymore at these creepy, open holes in the dungeon, so he decided it was time to finally slip into that small, unguarded spot. Just then, Chenny slipped up behind him like a whisper, apologizing with graceful sincerity for ruining his precious mealtime. Junpei jerked around, gasping, fully startled. She busted in out of nowhere, and he snapped to attention as she caught him off guard, whispering his name like a secret. Cheney met you with a soft, graceful grin and said, "It's been forever since the last time I sorticated you in Pesama." Junpei muttered under his breath the second he recognized her. Cheney, still strutting around in that bizarre getup with zero shame, just like he remembered, and when she grinned she basically lit up, swearing she was honored he hadn't forgotten her while bragging she served that obnoxious god. Then she described him in this wildly vulgar no-breaks way, saying he reeked like rotten smegma and looked like a dead mangled mongrel crushed under filth. Right then, Junpei's mind slammed into panic like, nope. I never said any of that. Chenny brushed off his denial, waved it away like it didn't matter, and told him he could say whatever he wanted about the god, she'd keep it locked between them. Junpei's mind screamed back, because honestly wasn't that her line first. Cheney then slipped right back to why she came, because the god had sent her to deliver a message. The message promised that once Junpei wiped this floor clean, the god would come straight into the dungeon to see him, just to have a little talk. Cheney said it plain, the god would show up and talk to him face to face. Junpei shot her an irritated glare when he realized she'd started munching his food like she owned the place, and she'd better be ready, because he told her he got her point the first time, and demanded what the god really wanted to talk about. Cheney took a sip like that mug was hers, then said Junpei should get the whole story straight from the god himself, because trust me. Junpei bristled as she slid from eating to drinking like she owned the place, and finally, with zero enthusiasm, he muttered that he understood. Chenny then told Junpei his status had shifted since they last met, and Junpei immediately blurted out, "Wait, are you talking about my HP? because if I still only had that little scrap of it, I'd be dead the second the weakest enemy even sneezed. Chenny praised his caution and practically shoved him towards survival mode. Watch his HP, guard his recovery, and don't miss a single detail, because she made it clear. One careless slip, and it could all end as his downfall. Chenny pushed himself up and launched forward, fast. She was ready to leave, then paused, looked back, and told him that if he could, she wanted him to whip up red bean rice cake and green tea for her next visit. Junpei couldn't wrap his head around why he'd ever risk doing something like that for her. Chenny just shrugged and said those were her favorites, and Junpei snapped inside. He didn't care what she liked one bit. Then he ordered her to get out immediately. Once she was gone, Junpei snapped back into motion and pushed deeper through the forest floor. Junpei muttered under his breath about her warning, "Be careful," and couldn't stop wondering why she said it like he wasn't already on guard. Then he clenched his resolve and told himself, "All right, it's time to move." Junpei took one step forward, then froze dead in his tracks when he realized he'd crossed the safe zone's border. He leaned in and whispered that the forest around him crawled with eerie dread, and it sank straight into his spine. As Junpei swept his eyes across the area, something felt brutally off, and he muttered to himself, "Where was the letter? That old man always left one behind, no matter where he went." Junpei figured, just like always, that the old man had bolted again, never lingering anywhere long enough to be caught. Shutting his eyes, Junpei muttered that the guy was probably lying dead, somewhere out there on this endless floor. Then a familiar voice burst through the trees, roaring with laughter, and cheering him on like he'd finally conquered the last stretch. Junpei snapped around on the spot, his eyes locking in pure, stunned recognition the moment that voice struck him like lightning. Leaves fluttered from the branches as Junpei stepped forward and whispered, "The voice is weaker, but the way he talks is unmistakable." He couldn't shake the thought, was this really that old man? That familiar voice shot back with playful protest, telling him, "Don't you dare call me old," and insisting he's only 25, no matter how he looks. He shouted again, demanding to know why Junpei was sitting there so tense. Junpei stood there, totally frozen, unable to move a muscle. Then the man pointed out how wildly nervous he looked, and honestly, after everything Junpei had survived, could you really blame him? Junpei shot back with a dry smirk that this guy definitely got every piece of misery you have to swallow to get this far, and the man nodded hard, saying he'd tell a love story. Help calm him down. Junpei's stomach dropped as the tone snapped, and his breath caught hard. The man leaned in and told how an adventurer once encountered a gorgeous tree spirit, a dryad, fell head over heels, married her, and rode that love into happily ever after. Then he dropped the bombshell. The adventurer was himself. Junpei froze, blinked, and quietly repeated dryad, like the word didn't make sense yet. The man leaned in and claimed dryads were these stunning, human lookalikes, so jaw-droppingly gorgeous that just staring at them could scramble a man's mind with pure admiration. Junpei nodded with steel in his voice. "I get it." Then he leaned in and fired the real question. Coldly demanding answers, he asked one thing, was the man happy? The moment the man appeared, he looked lifeless like a corpse, as his body sank deeper into the bark. He choked out a shaky little laugh, insisting he was totally happy, then gushed that she was an unimaginable beauty, and that every night the love felt like it was sucking the life out of him. Junpei clenched his fists, rage blazing in his chest, and wondered if that guy was hallucinating, because his life force was getting drained for real, and he'd walked straight into a honey trap without even realizing it, the poor fool. Junpei muttered through his breath that the moment he dreaded was finally here. This was the man who'd offered him advice, pulled him out of trouble countless times, and kept pushing him forward with that unstoppable energy. But watching him keep running from every problem, he already knew this ending was locked in from the start. While leaves kept drifting down, Junpei's thoughts twisted into something that hurt. Deep inside his tough, cruel facade, he clung to one tiny shred of hope, that one day he'd finally meet this man properly, clear the dungeon side by side, and fight with their backs locked together. For someone like Junpei, who mistrusted people more than anything, it was downright unreal how much he valued him. Junpei froze as he stood in crushing silence, tears pouring down his face. The man kept drifting along, smiling as he swore their hearts were tangled for eternity. Junpei just stared, crushed by grief, hit with rage, and stunned in disbelief. At last, Junpei snapped back, calling her out. Her tentacles weren't just touching their hearts, they were fusing together. With every last orifice flung open, his eyes jerked hard with every twitch, and he snapped in a rough gasp. Tentacles. Then started babbling warped pieces of the word as his mind shattered. His voice shot up higher and higher, cracking with every repeat like it was barely holding together. Junpei bared his teeth, fighting to steady his emotions as he watched the man's body shudder and jerk, like something inside him was fighting to break free. Junpei steadied his breathing and planted his feet, and muttered that he'd burn the tree, but first he had to end the man's suffering for good. His thoughts snapped to a stop, the second he felt someone standing right behind him. No hesitation, he snapped around, gun blazing up toward the threat. Two boots stomped out of the shadows, like they owned the night. A woman stepped into view, and Junpei snapped his gaze onto her instantly. Then he hissed a cold warning to stay perfectly still, certain she was the dried one who'd lured him in the first place. She didn't fight back at all. The dryad hissed that she was the spirit of the tree, then boasted she lured living creatures, especially humans, and fed on them for nutrients. Junpei went quiet for a beat, then leaned in and asked her straight out how she snagged her victims. The dryad broke down her mimic ultra-grade power. She could morph into whatever humans pictured as their perfect mate, and she'd reel them in with pure, irresistible seduction. Junpei shot her a brutal glare, then lifted his gun and sneered that her power was just way too convenient, until she snapped back that without her mimic, her true form would show up to humans as nothing but a filthy tree monster. Jevon's eyes narrowed like a blade as he finally got it. He murmured, "I understand," and then the dried remains just sat there, frozen and silent. Junpei pressed her for answers, demanding to know why she spilled everything so easily and what she was trying to get out of it. The dry simply said it cold, praying he'd let her live. Then Junpei's chest tightened with fury as the status window popped up, labeling her danger at D. The woman dried stood frozen, eerily calm, her face impossible to read as the forest light flickered over her, while Junpei's eyes burned with pure rage, his gun locked on her head the whole time. Rage blazed in Junpei's eyes, stiffening every muscle in his face as his teeth clamped down on a fury he could barely hold in. Between them, tension snapped like glass, sharp, heavy, and moments away from shattering. Junpei demanded answers, before she spilled her real plan, why she never tried to play him the same way she'd fooled the man now dead and stuck to the bark. The dried answered her with chilling calm, saying the man was already feeding her everything she needed, and any extra would turn poisonous inside her. Right then, the man's body twitched weakly, like proof. Junpei snorted, unconvinced, and fired back. "All right, I've got one more question." He figured other adventurers had clocked her mimic skill too. Then he cornered her with a hard, icy demand. How did she keep surviving all of them when she was basically a walking, free bank? Junpei snapped his voice sharp, demanding to know what he'd get back for sparing her life. She answered by gently, on purpose, sliding one of the beads off her necklace. She raised a shimmering bead toward him and called it a dryad's tear, the legendary recovery medicine, and Junpei snapped his hand up, signaling her to throw it. The dryad didn't hold back. She flicked the bead at him and pushed him to make a tiny cut so he could test the truth. But Junpei shut that down and said he'd judge it for himself. One heartbeat later, a slow, dangerous smirk stretched across Junpei's lips. Then he snapped out a short, cynical laugh as the truth finally hit. He finally got it. She'd been bribing every soul that stepped onto this floor with the exact same item, and the status window didn't lie. Dryad's tear, a legendary ranked treasure that can mend any injury, no death included, and it only works as long as the dryad who made it is still alive. The dryad finally spilled the truth. This was the reason every adventurer who found her chose to spare her life. Junpei gave a small, knowing grin, like he couldn't believe her offer was that irresistible. She kept talking, saying she hated fighting and just wanted enough nutrients to keep breathing, while Junpei muttered under his breath, darkly amused as his mind clicked into place. He added that what she was doing definitely looked peaceful, sure, if you squinted at it the right way. The dryad replied in a calm voice that even humans survived by taking nutrients from other living beings. Junpei dodged the question and snapped, "What happens to the man tied to that tree? Tell me the truth." The dried woman didn't blink. She said she'd keep siphoning the nutrients from him for months more. The man went dead silent and crumpled, body going limp, and Junpei planted himself right in front of them. Then he muttered, flat as stone, that was exactly how it had to end, because this situation only ever had one outcome. Junpei leaned in and told her he'd sunk big into agility, so he wouldn't need full recovery items anytime soon. Then the dryad went totally silent after that. Junpei kept going, saying it didn't mean he'd never get hit again, because he honestly thought he was dead when that monster IOE blast slammed him earlier, and he admitted the medicine had some real appeal. Junpei snapped into action and cut her off mid-sentence before she could even get the words out. He lifted his gun once more, leveled the barrel at her face, and snapped that no matter how much the item was worth, he just couldn't stand her. Then his voice slid into a ruthless, icy cold. The dryad's face turned grim and she snapped, "What do you mean?" Then pushed him to think long and hard, because the medicine she carries is worth far more than any thrill he'd steal by killing her. Junpei nodded, totally admitting she was dead on. Then his face contorted with raw rage, and he hissed that she should die. Out of nowhere, he yanked the trigger and drilled a perfect shot into her dead center forehead, so hard it snapped her head clean back, and she slammed into the ground with a hollow, lifeless thud. The mimic's disguise snapped instantly. Her skill crumbled as her body shriveled into a veined, wrinkled tree trunk, exposing exactly what she truly was. Junpei stood over the corpse, jaw clenched as hard breaths tore out of him. He was going to claim the mimic skill first. He pressed his hand to the dryad's dead trunk and triggered the butcher. Bam! A glowing skill card popped into the air, mimicking ultra rank with no time limit, and Junpei snatched it up instantly, grinning like he'd just won big. Thought ice cold that once he busted out of this dungeon, he'd unleash that skill on those guys, turning it into one of his deadliest weapons. Junpei then snapped his gaze to the man melded into the tree bark. His eyes gave one last twitch, and that was it, the life draining away for good. Junpei inched closer, then called out in a soft voice like he needed to hear it. So this really is the end, right? The man wouldn't answer, so Junpei shouted again, forcing the silence to hear him, that the man had always watched over him, thrown himself in the way, guided him through each horror, and kept him alive. Without him, Junpei would have been dead a long time ago. Junpei lunged ahead, gun up, teeth bared. Then a sudden clawing motion ripped toward him, forcing his whole body to tense. He swore he'd end the man's suffering, just enough to matter, then promised to steal his exp and skills so none of his hard-earned accomplishments would go to waste. Tears streaked down his cheeks as he leveled the barrel at the man's head, whispered a last goodbye, and thanked him like it was the final breath. A razor-sharp gunshot ripped through the forest's silence like thunder. Smoke hissed from the muzzle as Junpei's face twisted into a dark, choking grief, and the man didn't move. Blood pooled at his skull where he'd been shot. Junpei inched forward, pressed his hand onto the body, and whispered the butcher's activation like a secret spell. A card snapped into existence out of thin air. Then it dropped one of the rarest prizes yet, the anklets of evasion. Junpei snatched the card up, eyes wide with disbelief. His mouth dropped open as he blurted, "What does this even mean?" His mind was racing, because his butcher skills had just hit an ultra-grade level. Now, by the system's rule, if he wanted something above rare like Mimic, it should have been a guaranteed drop. His eyes snapped wide, something felt terribly wrong. So he planted one step and launched into a full sprint with sudden urgency, unless. The only answer struck him like lightning, leaving him no choice but to believe it. Junpei sprinted like his life depended on it, heart hammering as he chased his gut feeling, and then right there, he spotted it, the door to the next floor. He barreled straight toward it, eyes snapping across the area like he was hunting for a clue, because deep down he knew there had to be something more hiding here. Then his gaze snapped onto a familiar slab, sitting on the floor. His chest went tight the second he recognized the slate, and before doubt even hit, he snatched up the card sitting right next to it. A familiar flicker hit the screen, and the man popped back into view. He blared a greeting to Junpei, threw his head back laughing, and peppered him with questions about how he was doing, all while rushing to apologize for not leaving a message on the last floor because the whole place was pure chaos. Relief hit Junpei like a wave the moment that familiar, cheerful voice cut through the air, warmth and grief crashing into his chest at the same time. Then the man went on to say, "If you're reading this, you must have grabbed the Dryad's tear, so use it wisely." The man couldn't stop gushing about how hard he was stunned by the sight of the same guy who'd grabbed him earlier. Watching the guy speak and realizing it was exactly like him, Junpei lit up with pure relief, tears pouring from his eyes, while the recording said the captor wasn't afraid of him at all, but terrified of what was happening to himself. And then the man just blurted out, wondering if his own way of talking was really that silly. He kept smiling and laughed, saying Junpei might have mixed that guy up for him, but no way to panic, because he was proudly packing retrovision, and stuff like that couldn't beat him. The recording kept rolling as he blurted out wild remarks about Chick's provocative outfit, claiming he'd nearly lost control, then cackling that he already warned Junpei about her. He even tossed out that the guy was around 25, but then he cut himself off and giggled like a troublemaker, muttering that his age was a secret. At last, the man snapped that he'd talked enough and ordered Junpei to remember one thing: this old man would never die. With a bright, cheerful farewell, he vanished into thin air. Junpei gave a gentle smile and told him he'd be counting on him, just like always. Then the message vanished. Junpei grinned again, buzzing with fresh excitement, and muttered that the old man had sparked him to chase retrovision too. Just a breath later, Junpei planted himself in front of the next floor's entrance, jaw set, convinced that the creep, the god, was finally coming to meet him there. Junpei didn't hesitate. He flung the door open, and a thick wave of smoke exploded outward, wrapping around his legs as the hinges screamed. Drowning in smog, the god Hidari stood there, watching like a storm that couldn't be escaped. Hidari flashed a smug smirk and teased that Junpei was doing just fine, and Junpei just shrugged calmly back that yeah, it's been a while. Junpei stood opposite Hidari, and the air around them tightened into a tense standoff, like every moment leading up to this was holding its breath, because Hidari's godly presence buzzed with creepy playfulness and ironclad authority. Hidari the god threw him a casual cheer and nodded like, "Yeah, you're doing okay," and Junpei answered with a shaky half-smile, admitting, "It really has been a while. but you could still feel the weight behind his eyes. They froze in place for a beat, locking eyes in tense silence. Then Hidari finally spoke, relief in his voice, saying he was glad Junpei was doing well, and asking what awesome thing had happened. Junpei let out a heavy sigh and blurted, "So there's no point pretending I don't know." Hidari had been watching the whole time, then grinned and chuckled like Junpei finally got it fast. Junpei snapped back that Hidari had shoved him through one catastrophe after another just to laugh at it, and if that was the god's plan, then why wasn't he at least keeping an eye on things? Hidari chuckled again, and admitted, yeah, that was a fair point. But Hidari snapped that Junpei was acting way too cold after such a long separation. Junpei's eyes turned cold, like something dangerous just woke up. Clenched fists shaking, he snapped at Hidari to stop his nonsense, because everything Junpei had endured was Hidari's twisted entertainment, and now Hidari actually expected him to be friendly. That thought disgusted him to the core. Hidari's face snapped sharper as he warned Junpei, "Don't let yourself freeze up on me," then reminded him of his power, how he could pop a head like fireworks in a heartbeat, and he made it clear, don't test him and don't brush off his kindness. Junpei went dead silent for a beat, judging exactly how dangerous this was. Then he declared, dead serious, that Hidari was dreaming, and he swore his choice was made ages ago, the day he devoured the no-life king's flesh. After that, he promised he'd never kneel to violence again, no matter if it was Hidari's blade or Kito's. Hidari swallowed his reaction, while Junpei stared him down with a sharp glare. Then Hidari suddenly erupted into a victorious burst of laughter. He said this was exactly why he loved Junpei. No pretending, no doubts, just pure, real devotion. Then he leaned in and announced it was time to drop the small talk and dive straight into the real deal. With a snap of his fingers, Hidari conjured a chair and table out of thin air, then pointed at them like, "Sit, Junpei," and warned him this wasn't going to be small talk at all. There were dungeon rules so strict that even a god like him couldn't bend them. He laid down the first rule. Once you step onto a dungeon floor, you don't get to leave until you can beat it. No excuses, no loopholes. It was simple and deadly absolute. He made it crystal clear, even with a clear rate of 0, that dungeon wasn't some no-way trap, you could still beat it. Hidari blurted out that he came to warn Junpei, this next floor can't be cleared with his current stats, period. Yet Junpei just stared back with the same flat, unimpressed look. He demanded an answer, and Hidari snapped back that Junpei's stats were hopelessly off. His attack and defense were both stuck at 5. Step onto a volcanic floor and the heat alone would cook him alive, and if he ever had to use an item that was even a little heavy, he wouldn't lift it in the first place. Hidari warned Junpei that if he kept moving the way he was right then, he'd end up dying in some stupid, humiliating mess, so Junpei clenched his teeth and couldn't fire back. Hidari kept going, saying this dungeon was built for monsters way beyond any normal human. Then Junpei, forget strong, he was basically the weakest guy alive, and to make it worse, he was jobless. Hidari admitted he lasted this long only because his status was wildly tilted in his favor, but sheesh, luck wouldn't keep saving him forever. He made it clear that Junpei's survival game was basically a blatant rule-breaker's dream. Then he slammed into Ari Grint and told him he'd decided to step in himself to help Junpei. He declared he'd help him escape this place. Then Junpei just froze, stunned out of his mind. He gasped in stunned silence. Then Hidari snapped the truth into place. Leaving wasn't about going back to Japan. It was about wiping the dungeon off the board, and once that happened, Junpei would sign up with the Adventurers Guild and climb his rank from there. Junpei blinked in shock, repeating it, his adventure rank. Hidari straight up confirmed it, saying Junpei had to climb to rank B or higher. Junpei could register and start out at rank C, then climb the ranks by grinding through enough missions. Hidari told Junpei, right now you're just a skill hunter on paper, nobody officially recognizes it, and once he hit rank B, the guild would rubber stamp the job no matter how he acted, then hand him a real, legitimate class. After that, every time Junpei leveled up, he'd rack up 5 extra status points. Hidari said it like it was a fact. Every point Junpei should have gotten by now would be paid back in full, and Junpei's eyes shot wide with shock at the realization. Hidari kept going, and it hit Junpei like a lightning bolt. Now he truly got it. Every single stat had to climb to at least 300, and he had only 3 months to do it. By the end, he needed to break past rank B while grinding his stats higher to match. Hidari told him that he didn't care what Junpei did outside, but Junpei had to come back to the dungeon in just 3 months, and whether he used that time smart or wasted it was completely up to him. Then sparks of excitement lit up Junpei's eyes. Junpei thought he finally got what Hidari was saying, yet deep down, he sensed something bigger and more urgent. Once he slipped out, he could finally hunt for Kito and Noriko. Tracking them down mattered more than anything else. Hidari leaned toward Junpei and said, "Past that door is the outside world." Then he tossed his blessing and wished him luck. Junpei said that before he even stepped out, he might as well hit Mimic and swap his face. because he wasn't planning to run into those bastards anytime soon. In the blink of an eye, his face snapped into Hidari's, like, yep, this is how it's supposed to look. Then Hidari erupted in wild laughter, staring at those droopy, worried eyes and the golden hair gleaming bright, and grinned, "Junpei, you're adorable, I just want to bully you." Hidari snapped that if Junpei wanted to hide his real identity, he couldn't use a single thing pulled from the dungeon, including his toxic blood, so Junpei shot back, "Yeah, I know," opened the box and tucked his weapon away. Hidari blurted out, all fired up, asking if he was ready. Then, without even a breath, he launched him forward. A spark of pure excitement lit up Junpei's face. He knew this could boost his status, and then he'd track down those bastards. Junpei shoved the door open and strode ahead, wearing his brand new face like a weapon. Thin smoke curled through the air, and Junpei jerked his gaze around, totally lost. Where am I? It was warm, it reeked of sulfur. Was he standing in a hot spring? He slammed on the brakes, the moment he spotted someone waiting right in front of him. A naked woman swept around to face him with slow, graceful control, and then she tucked her hair behind her ear. Junpei froze on the spot, unable to breathe or speak. Her serene, curious eyes locked onto him like it was no big deal, and his face shot bright red as his mind screamed, "Is this really happening?" She murmured something that sounded like faint, hazy recognition, but she couldn't piece the memory together, and Junpei jerked back in a sharp flinch. She stared him down, digging through her memories like they were a puzzle, then said, slow and careful, "Maybe he was," and Junpei couldn't even keep up with what she was saying. Overwhelmed, he snapped around fast, blurting out apologies as he scrabbled backward to get away. She flashed him a sweet smile and promised, "I'll see you later." Junpei stumbled into the next room, still burning red and spinning with dizziness, then whipped around to stare back in total disbelief. He stared in disbelief, trying to figure out how he just ended up in this mess. Then Hidari flashed a grin, owning up like, "Yeah, that was my mistake." Junpei lunged at him, smashing him to the floor with pure rage, and Hidari shot up screaming, "Why are you so mad?" Junpei snapped back that Hidari should have been thanking him for such fine service. Junpei's cheeks flared red as he blurted, "Stop messing around and take this seriously." Hidari swore up and down it was just an honest mistake, an accident. Afterward he grumbled that it wasn't time for those two to cross paths yet. Junpei snapped asking who that woman was, and Hidari shot back with a snarky refusal, like, "I'm not explaining," and honestly, he probably shouldn't. Junpei shot daggers with his glare seething, shut his eyes tight, and grumbled that whatever it was, he'd shove it out of his mind and forget it. Junpei snapped that he better send him to the right place this time, and Hidari scratched his head, then nodded like, "Got it." With a snap of his fingers, a brand new door materialized out of thin air. Hidari grinned and said, "Yeah, this one's the right one." Junpei shot back that he really, truly hopes it's gonna happen. The instant he crossed the threshold, a naked woman materialized in front of him, right out of nowhere. Junpei yelled in pure disbelief, because it was happening again, just like last time. The woman shot him a brutal glare, and Junpei erupted, cursing the god as loud as he could, fed up to the bone with all this nonsense, while Hidari stood firm, insisting that this time, they'd finally reached the true right destination. A knife shot through the air and slammed into the tree right beside Junpei's head. He jolted back, gasping in pure shock at the brutal ambush. The woman yanked herself back into cover and snapped, demanding his identity. She insisted nobody was supposed to be here. Then she stared him down, wondering if he was a bandit. Junpei paused, scrambling for an answer, until her face crumpled with shock as realization hit, and she blurted it out. Could he be one of the folks they dragged from Earth? She gasped, and Junpei snapped to a stop, stunned. At the same time, thrill lit up her face. Staring her down face to face, Juin's brows snapped together in raw confusion, his face stuck in disbelief as his mind scrambled to make sense of what he was seeing. He froze in stunned silence, totally unable to make sense of the wild scene playing out in front of him, while the woman let out a light laugh, almost like she'd nailed his reaction perfectly. The woman told him she was about to change clothes, ordered him to turn around, and Junpei just froze, stammering like an idiot, totally blindsided. Without a single pause, he whipped around, cheeks burning as embarrassment crashed into him, and he scrambled to pull himself together. While behind him, the woman gave a gentle smile and let out a long sigh, like the tension finally slipped off her shoulders. Moments later, the woman was finally dressed, and she muttered that Junpei must have assumed only the people he brought with him got transporting from Earth. Yet the truth was way uglier. Loads more of them were scattered all across this world. Junpei pressed her for answers, demanding to know how she could tell he'd been taken. She shot back with casual confidence, like the answer was painfully obvious, and then he popped up out of nowhere, right behind her, and you could practically feel the gods at work, shuffling people around just to mess with them. She said that every single word people blurted out in this world got auto-translated into the local language, no matter if they liked it or not. So yeah, back then, they didn't use language to spot who was from Earth. They just clocked it by how they looked, or the way they acted. Then she flashed a grin, bright, lively like sunshine, and introduced herself as Mia Rizuki Mia, 21, from Japan. She told him she used to work in clothes on Earth, but here she's an adventurer now, smiled at him, and asked which country he came from. Junpei grumbled that she was an adventurer, then added that he was Japanese too, because of course he was, and the name Hirata Takashi came with a little mental grin. He was a high schooler, and that real name was technically his after all. Mia leaned in, intrigued, and said he was Japanese too. Then she pointed out that his face and hair color were downright unusual. Junpei admitted he'd gotten lost and got separated from his friends. Mia flashed him a warm smile and said, "Don't worry, I've got you." She told him to call her Mia, and since he was brand new to this world, she was going to drag him around and show him everything. Junpei went stone-cold quiet, eyes drifting as his mind raced. Could it really be true he ran into a weird stranger the second he left the dungeon? Since she was an adventurer, he figured he could squeeze out some useful info from her. For now, he'd play along. After a little while, Mia blurted out that it had been ages since she'd run into a Japanese person. And man, there was so much she was dying to talk about. But for now, she said, let's get him settled first. No deep talks until we've got him under control. Mia swept her arm out and unveiled the city in full view. This was her main headquarters, the sacred city of Aya. And as you stared up at the towering spires and rushing streets, it felt like the whole place was alive and booming. She told him, don't sweat it. This city is packed with jobs for adventurers, and as long as you stay here, you'll never have to wonder where your next meal comes from. They kept moving through the town. Then Junpei suddenly blurted out, asking where the Adventurers Guild was, because he wanted to become one too, and Mia's face lit up with real shock. She told him that even folks who got pulled here from Earth still had to find a way to live. And honestly, becoming an adventurer was the smart move, because it was way better than rotting as a slave or getting branded as a criminal. She snapped into a grin and told him this world was nothing like their old one. Then she warned, dead serious, that if he didn't watch his step, something here would chew him up and eat him alive. Jew and pagan. Please tighten your brow even more. Junpei clocked that she was getting way too close, and before the panic could spike, Mia laughed and said she was just messing around, trying to melt the tension. But Junpei couldn't shake the fear that she'd sniff out the poison living in his body, so he forced himself to keep his distance. As they pushed deeper into the city's core, the noise cranked up around them, then Junpei clocked it. Mia had tugged him straight into a sketchy alley. His guts snapped with suspicion. Were they truly headed for the guild, or was Mia setting him up? His eyes narrowed, burning with doubt as the plan suddenly felt dangerous. Mia skidded to a sudden stop, shot a hand up, and signaled Jun to halt too, because cloaked men were closing in just ahead. A thunderous voice ripped through the crowd, screaming for everyone to clear the path for His Excellency, Bishop Sumno Cortessa of the Holy Church. She strode forward, beaming at the citizens, and asked how they were doing. From the crowd, whispers rolled out like prayers. Her title, her excellence, her courtly name, her holiness, each voice shaking with pure awe. Junpei couldn't stop wondering who the hell she was. Then out of nowhere, a man blurted out in panic, begging her to look his way. He begged for the church to let a young orphan inside, saying the kid had just moved near his shop and tried to rob him. But he swore the church's mercy could save the boy, and the holiness stepped up, staring him down. The man admitted the boy had stolen, but the holiness was famous for taking in orphans and homeless kids. Then the bishop leaned close and whispered something under his breath. Then she locked eyes with the boy, her stare cutting straight through him, and he went rigid, pure terror crashing over his face. She pressed her hand on the child's head and declared, "Your sins aren't the end. If you work hard, serve others, and truly atone, you can still be saved." Her grin stretched way too far as dark power rolled off her, and she snapped that the church was built to help someone just like him. The crowd murmured in awe at her holiness, and their voices rang out with worship. Junpei leaned in and asked Mia who those guys were, and Mia snapped back that they were church people, then practically begged him to stay far away and not get tangled up with them. She snapped that the church held tightly. They spread their influence from coast to coast, preaching honorable poverty and purity, but behind the curtain, the powerful ones crushed the people and exploited them for everything they could get. Mia admitted that everyone had their suspicions, but not a single soul dared challenge them. For that boy, she told him, only misery stood in his future, and Junpei's face instantly darkened. Mia told him, good news, the Adventurers Guild sits outside this church's reach, and for now, both sides held the power in equal measure. She made it crystal clear, the church wasn't some group common folk could even question, and that brutal reality was the only world they knew. Junpei shot back, got it, and after a beat, they were right back on the move. Mia leaned in and told me the guild was right up ahead. Then she leaned in and asked if he had a guarantor. Junpei just stared, utterly confused. Mia told him flat out he'd need a guarantor just to register with the guild, and that guarantor had to be powerful, rich, and at least an A-rank adventurer. She tossed it out like it was nothing. Someone like her could step into that role and get it done. Junpei blinked in shock and asked if she really was an A-ranked adventurer. Mia puffed up with pride and said, yeah, she's an advanced class thief, and her skills match her title perfectly. Then Mia leaned in and said, since we're both from Japan, I'll be your guarantor. Junpei fixed her with a sharp, suspicious stare and cranked his brain, trying to figure out what she was really up to. She'd sign on as his guarantor, but could he really bet his life on her? He had zero problem with the requirement itself, since it was simple enough to verify, but if she turned on him, he'd be toast. He kept thinking, then finally admitted the truth. He couldn't afford to waste time hunting down a guarantor. What he really wanted was someone like that old man. Painful memories surged back into his mind, like claws tearing through flesh. Nope, Junpei made his call, then apologized in a low, steady voice. Mia shot him a curious look, and he made it clear he wasn't some easy yes-man, even if her real intentions were still a bit unclear. There was no way he'd fall for her so fast. Mia just stared him down in silence, reading every ounce of his resolve. With a serious glare, Junpei told her he didn't care what scheme she'd cooked up, because nothing in the world could break him. Suddenly, someone surged into view, and her holy words cut through the air with a soft, chilling greeting. Junpei spun around, stunned to see her standing there. She swore she didn't recognize him, then bluntly asked if he was homeless. And as if he had nowhere left to run, her face twisted into pure, venomous malice. Junpei's mind went cold. There she was again, that old hag. What did she want this time? He could bolt if he had to, but if he ran, she'd retaliate and wreck his guild application. He paced in panic, gripping his thoughts like they were slipping away, desperate to figure out what to do next. Right before he could even answer, Mia marched forward and declared with zero hesitation that he wasn't homeless at all, just a friend who'd been with her after a long adventure, and the holiness's face changed in an instant. She leaned in and asked, so you two are adventurers, right? Mia shot back a yes, and the holiness murmured like it was weighing her answer in silence. Then she flashed a grin and swore she wanted the guild and her church to stay on good terms, and that she'd never forget their faces. The holiness bowed, wished them good health, and drifted away gracefully. Mia and Junpei go completely still as she slips out of sight and disappears. Mia let out this long, heavy sigh, sweat pouring down her brow. Then Junpei stared at her, utterly baffled. He grilled her, asking why she'd help him, when they could barely call each other friends, and pushing even harder, wondering why she'd risk everything for a stranger. Mia pressed him for an explanation, and Junpei finally said it plain. She shielded him from the church. Mia went silent for a beat. Then he shot back, don't you think she's trying to win my gratitude so I'll owe her later? Junpei said, yeah, but getting a favor from someone like me could never beat the risk of angering the church. Mia flashed a sweet smile and told him he was hilarious. Sure, he looked like a weak, clueless newbie in this world, but somehow he still gave off this wild aura that screamed overwhelming power. Junpei let out a tired breath, sick of every word she threw at him. Then she finally came clean. She was into him, and she wasn't demanding instant trust. She was determined to earn it, one action at a time. Then she leaned in and asked, will you do me a favor, partner up with me? A soft smile tugged at Zhu and Pei's lips. Then he swore he'd do it and promised to be counting on her, and Mia's face lit up like she'd just hit the jackpot. She snapped her finger and called out the obvious. His clothes were falling apart. Then she demanded to know if it was some weird fashion trend. Junpei shot back that there was a real reason behind it, but Mia guessed it was just that 8th grade syndrome, and Junpei instantly denied it. They kept marching toward the Adventurers Guild, trading easy laughs and casual talk the whole way. Meanwhile, deep in the crowd, a pair of silent feet slipped forward, then a cloaked girl appeared, strolling alone with a blank face, dead eyes, and zero emotion. At the Adventurers Guild, the front desk woman handled Junpei's registration like it was routine, then calmly confirmed she'd delist him as a C-ranked adventurer. She made it crystal clear. His rank would rise or drop depending on how perfectly he crushed his quests. She went on to say that even the quests had ranks too, and adventurers had to pick requests that matched their level. After she wrapped up the quest story, she told him to hit the Contact Guild button on his status plate so he could link up with them through magic. Then once the guild verified his completion, they'd hand over the exact points he needed to climb his adventurer rank. And with that, she capped it off with a final wish: go out there and live the best adventure life. Once the registration was done, Mia beamed and congratulated him on becoming an adventurer, booked them a room for the celebration, and nudged him to toast. Then, when they finally slid into their seats, Junpei brought up the question he'd been holding back for ages, calling her Mia-san. Mia waved the formal stuff off at once and told him to call her Mia, like there was zero reason to be shy, then lifted her cup for a toast. Junpei matched her, said Mia too, and made sure in his own head that Shinus had absolutely nothing to do with it. Junpei snapped that he had his reasons, and he had to claw his way to rank B ASAP. No time to grind through tiny missions. Then he leaned in and demanded to know, was there any quest that could rocket him to the next rank in one single run? Mia froze for a second, then lit up and said there could be a quest like that, taking a sip from her cup as she weighed every wild possibility. She nonchalantly snatched his cup next, then decided, yeah, she was going to drink from his too. Mia tipped her drink to her lips, and Junpei jerked like he'd been struck. And without a second thought, he cut her off cold and told her flat out not to drink it. Junpei cursed under his breath. His own body fluids were deadly. He hadn't gone deep with experiments, but he just knew it. His saliva would be just as poisonous as his blood. If she even took a sip from his cup, it would turn into a straight-up disaster. Mia watched him for a beat, then calmly dropped the bomb. Her suspicions were confirmed. She couldn't stop grinning, absolutely thrilled with herself. She smirked like she'd nailed it, claiming he was just what she'd pictured. A guy whose body, or maybe everything about him, was soaked in toxins he couldn't fully tame. Junpei just froze, hit with pure shock at how dead on her read was. Fists clenched with raw frustration, he seethed, while Mia burst into laughter, thrilled she'd read him again, saying he was an open book in her hands. She admitted he might have never caught on, but he'd been backing away from her the whole time. Like he was terrified she'd uncover his poison. Junpei's eyes narrowed, and he demanded to know if she'd set him up. Then she snatched a sip from his cup without a second thought. Junpei lunged to stop her and yelled, but he was already too late. Then a faint sheen of moisture clung to Mia's lips as she set the cup down. She shot back and declared she was immune to poison. No matter how vicious his toxins were, they couldn't touch her because it was one of her skills, a built-in natural defense. Mia snapped that if they were going to team up, they needed to dig deeper and get to know each other, and then she reached out, offering her hand like, trust me. She said she had other skills too, but each one demanded a direct hit on her opponent before she could trigger it. So Junpei swallowed his pride and admitted, even if only in his head, that he was nowhere near her level, and Mia stared at him with a sharp, curious look, completely thrown by his hesitation. He let out a heavy sigh, then started spilling his real power, saying one of his abilities was total resistance to every abnormality, letting him stomach the toxins inside him, or he wouldn't have survived at all. He teased that he had even more skills to reveal later, and Mia practically screamed, got it. Then she pressed him for his job, and Junpei shot back that he had none, so Mia instantly clocked it. He was a skill hunter. Junpei demanded how she knew, and Mia snapped back that the first time she was summoned, she'd watched a few guys just like him show up, then every single one of them got killed. Mia then pressed him, so what are you gonna do after you hit rank B? And Junpei shot back that he was hunting for someone. She blurted out, are you a friend? Like she couldn't help but hope. He snapped back with a blunt no, locking eyes with her like he wasn't going to budge an inch. Mia let out a soft sigh, then flashed a bright smile. She said she totally understood, because this world has been brutal for her too. She said she totally understood his pain, while Junpei dropped his head, drowning in his own thoughts. After a quick pause, Mia told him, talk later, right now focus. Then she repeated his mission, line for line. He had to rank up and stay on track with a single job. Mia proposed that they take a quest under his name, and she'd back him until it was finished. She even pointed out that almost no quests matched that exact setup. Then Junpei let out a heavy, defeated sigh. Then Mia leaned in and said she might have spotted something, right on time. A quest had just dropped, and she pushed for us to take it, track down a missing chimera and get 3,200 rank points as the reward. Then they raced to the spot Mia pointed out, because a shady magician who cooked up chimeras had just been knocked down there, and the worst part was he'd not only been illegally making them, he'd been trafficking them too. She said the party that finally defeated him didn't wipe out every last chimera, so now this was basically cleanup duty, a straight-up subjugation quest. Mia admitted she didn't know Junpei's exact strength, but she figured this job wouldn't be too rough if he finished it. He'd scrape right up into rank B. She told them to go clean up the mess, then suddenly her tone cracked, something else was eating at her, and Junpei just stared, totally thrown by the wild turn. Mia said it didn't have anything to do with their current job, then admitted a rumor's been spreading like wildfire. Someone's been cleaning these areas out before anyone else even gets there. She swore that no matter how brutal the quest gets or how ferocious the monster is, this adventurer would snap up the highest level jobs, crush the strongest subjugation targets first, and harvest the rewards and XP before anyone else even gets a shot. Mia leaned in and said everyone knew her as the white-hooded woman, and that she was a deadly skill hunter too. Junpei can't stop thinking about a female skill hunter, and the thought gnaws at him from the back of his. Then right out of nowhere, a name popped into Junpei's head, maybe the perfect candidate, and Mia immediately warned him, don't even bother, fighting me is pointless. If you run into me, you bolt. Junpei quickly nodded back, saying he got it. They slipped into the area with nerves on full blast, and Mia scanned everything, because every trap was already knocked out. She clicked her tongue, fumed out loud, and groaned that she'd been dying to flex her thief skills. Junpei stayed quiet, brushing off her playful grumbles, and then Mia shot him a quick look. He smirked and teased that if his body was packed with toxins, then he couldn't possibly get any. Then that question hit, and his face flushed crimson in an instant. Junpei choked on a gasp, and Mia leaned in even closer, bluntly asking if he was still a virgin. Junpei snapped back, saying he'd already told her to drop those remarks, and Mia chirped sorry, but then she hit him with the truth. Realistically, there were only a few people he could safely get close to. Like that girl with poison immunity, she tipped her hand with a quiet little reference to herself, and Junpei just stared back with a drained, emotionless look. Mia burst into a giggle and insisted she was just messing around, while Junpei froze, his blush darkening by the second. At the exact same moment, Mia and Junpei both jolted rigid, their instincts snapping sharp as needles. Out of nowhere, a monster exploded forward for a brutal lunge, but both of them slammed into the side in time, narrowly avoiding the hit. They snapped their attention to the creature, eyes razor-sharp as the monster towered over them, grotesque and ready, half-bald with hair crowding only one side, twisted mouth spilling fangs from the right as it reared back for the next brutal strike. Junpei and Mia snapped into fighting stances, bracing as the monster loomed overhead. Junpei snapped on his appraisal skill. Boom, a glowing window flashed, a chimera half human and half dragon. The danger rating jumped around, but this one clocked in at rank B. It was a spell-forged monster made from both living flesh and crafted materials, and its power rose or fell depending on exactly what went into it. Mia hissed that the man who'd fused into the chimera was hopeless, ruined past any chance of coming back, so the merciful move was to end it. She gripped her weapons and told Junpei to back off as she stepped in to put him out of his misery. The chimera slammed into the battlefield again, and Mia juked aside at the last second, backing up as its claws tore through the air where she'd been. Without hesitation, she hurled her weapon at the charging beast, but the chimera twisted right past it. The monster snapped back with a brutal second strike, but Mia hurled herself aside. Its blow crashed into the floor instead. As Mia braced herself for yet another exchange, she finally clocked just how fast that chimera moved, and she knew right then this fight would eat up way more time than she'd planned. While she was still processing it, Junpei snapped up and said she was taking too long, like he was already done waiting. He might as well do it himself, right? Mia whipped her head toward him, stunned. The chimera lunged again, ready to slam its next strike, but before it could land, Junpei flashed in like a blur and cut its throat in one brutal instant. The creature crumpled to the floor with a brutal thud, and blood burst into the air like a violent splash. Junpei just stared at the monster's corpse with this dull, unimpressed look, like it didn't even matter, while Mia's eyes snapped wide with shock. Junpei stared at his knife and thought, it's just some ordinary blade, so he didn't expect anything special, until he realized his crazy high agility had turned that accuracy up to insane levels, and if these chimera enemies were this weak, then landing critical hits would be effortless. He admitted in his head that this all hinged on things staying exactly like this, while Mia just stared at him, eyes huge, still reeling from the speed she'd witnessed. She blurted praise, stunned by how fast he was, and couldn't help wondering who he really was. Junpei only smirked and said he'd explain after they cleared the quest. They snapped their gaze back to the fallen chimera, and Junpei demanded, "Is that the only one we have to kill?" Mia shook her head, said there had to be more, and pushed a plan, split up and hunt them down. Junpei nodded, and just like that, they went their separate ways. Junpei halted in front of a door buried deeper in the facility, then eased it open with careful, trembling caution. Then he shoved the door wide, and horror spilled out into the open like a nightmare caught mid-draw. Junpei muttered that this place looked like a chimera storage, a full-on breeding facility, and in the chamber, grotesque forms packed every corner in endless rows. A trembling voice shouted his name, and Junpei's eyes went wide with pure shock. A nightmare beast, monstrous body swarming with writhing tentacles, had one thing that didn't belong, a human head, begging for help like it was about to drown in fear. Junpei froze when he finally recognized the face. It was Nakabayashi Yoshihiko, staring at this guy, burning with questions about why he was here and what happened to his face, as the disfigured man tore into him with a desperate plea for salvation. The chimera man begged Junpei to undo the curse and bring him back to his human body, swearing the mage had duped him, promising cold cash if he helped them hunt someone. But when he failed, the magician didn't just punish him, he chopped him up and used him as an ingredient. A warped grin clawed across Junpei's face, then he yanked off his disguise and killed the transformation magic. He said he finally understood what was going on, and weirdly part of him felt relieved. But when he looked at Naka, he realized nothing had changed. Naka was still that same disgusting pile of filth. The moment it hit, Naka choked on a horrified gasp. Junpei muttered Kito, Nariko, and Sakagami under his breath, checked the list was right, and then snapped, "So where are they?" Naka shrieked in pure shock when he recognized him, then blurted out Junpei's name through his panic, demanding to know how he was still alive. Junpei yanked the man's hair and snapped for silence, warning him with a threat he couldn't ignore. He shot Naka a freezing glare and snapped that he didn't have a second to answer her questions. Junpei snapped that so much had happened, and right now he was mid-quest with a friend, telling Naka he'd contact the guild to rescue him, but only after Naka spilled the whole truth. Naka went silent for a beat, then muttered, "I get it," and straight up blared it louder. "I understand, and I'll tell Junpei everything." He knew exactly what Junpei wanted, the truth about where they were. Naka told him that once they dumped Junpei into the dungeon, everyone split and left, until Sakakibara broke away from the group fast, and Junpei just kept his ears sharp, listening like his life depended on it. Naka kept going, and not long after that, Kaido snapped, got fed up with Noriko, and sold her off as a slave. Junpei went stone, still at those words, and Naka kept talking, saying that after that, Kaido took to robbery and indulged himself in it. He kept raping and murdering people, doing whatever he wanted with zero limits. That wild move rattled Sakagami Tatsuya, so hard he bolted right out of the group too. Naka said Kaido had always had a soft spot for Nariko, even in their old world, so they figured he'd come back for her and pull off the rescue. Naka admitted he ditched the group once things got way too dangerous, then spent all his strength hunting for a way to survive, somehow ending up right in this condition. Junpei's expression darkened fast. "Did you find out anything else about Noriko?" Naka shook his head, then leaned in and asked, "So, have you heard of that white-hooded woman?" Junpei didn't hesitate. "Yeah," he said, "I have." Naka told her he'd seen a magical projection of her once, only back then her face and expression looked totally different. But he was dead sure about it. There was no doubt in his mind that it was Noriko. That rumor about a skill hunter lurking around here, plus the white-hooded woman being Nariko, kept slamming into Junpei's head, and it dragged out a long, exhausted sigh from his chest. The more his thoughts tightened, the more he realized if this was the key to Nariko's problem, then he still had to find out whatever happened to Kaido. Naka's voice turned tense as he admitted he barely knew a thing about Kaido anymore. He remembered when Kaido's brutal reputation was everywhere, then watched it quietly vanish in these last few months, maybe because Kaido finally died, or maybe because something even worse came along and buried those rumors for good. Junpei just went dead silent, taking it all in without a single twitch on his face. Then Naka snapped that he'd already spilled everything he had and demanded Junpei rescue him. Junpei snapped a cold, sideways look at him, like he was already brushing him off, then let out a quiet scoff. That one sound lit a fuse in Naka's face. He clenched his teeth, exploded with rage, and screamed that Junpei was messing with him, reminding him he'd promised to contact the guild. Junpei shrugged off his rage completely, letting the whole outburst fizzle into nothing. As he stepped forward, that glare sharpened into something ruthless, and he made Naka remember. Sure, Noriko and Kito were his main targets, but he'd clocked every single person standing behind them. Every bully, every dark shadow that kept tormenting him. After all that pain, what made Naka think he'd be the one thing spared? Panic exploded across Naka's face as he snapped and screamed Junpei's name, firing out brutal curses that came straight from terror, not rage. Junpei grabbed his hair without breaking a sweat, cool as ice, saying he'd meant to torture him for real. But time was running out, and watching Naka fall apart was already satisfying enough. With a single brutal motion, Junpei launched Naka into the air, like a clean goodbye, before Naka even hit the ground. Junpei's blade tore through him midair, slicing him into pieces with terrifying, surgical precision. A piece of Naka's twisted face smashed onto the tiles with a wet, jarring thud, and blood sprayed everywhere. Then Junpei slowly lowered his knife, the blade still dripping drop by drop. With a quick, faint twitch in the air, he snapped back into his true form and let out a long, exhausted breath. A sudden rustle burst out of a sack in the corner, yanking his attention away from the blood-stained floor. Junpei couldn't shake the feeling it might be another chimera, so he hit his appraisal, and nothing popped up. When nobody answered, doubt flickered in his head. Maybe they weren't monsters after all. He dropped into a crouch by the sack, undid the knot, and inched it open, slow and tense. Inside, a face he knew all too well stared back, the terrified boy from before, and Junpei hit the brakes hard, eyes snapping wide as recognition slammed into him, shocked to find someone he never thought he'd meet here. Junpei dropped to one knee in front of the shaking kid, and demanded to know if he'd been kidnapped. When the boy nodded, Junpei's breath hitched and he sighed. Carefully loosening the cloth over his mouth, she leaned in and promised him, "I'm not here to hurt you, I mean no harm." The boy blurted out, his voice shaking, that he was an orphan from a nearby village, caught red-handed stealing in a Avaya. Once they caught him, they shoved him into the old granny's care, then locked him in the church basement and put him through hours upon hours of brutal, excruciating torture. He kept talking about how the old granny checked his body afterward, told him to come back once it turned into something she liked. Then she slipped him drugs and sent him. It threw him straight into darkness. Then when he finally woke up, he was here, scared out of his mind, stranded and utterly alone. Tears blasted down his face as the boy blurted to Junpei, "Who are you, and what's going to happen to me?" Junpei yanked the rope out of the boy's hands, swore nothing else would happen, and declared him free. Then Junpei asked his name, and the boy answered, "Libel." Junpei nodded like he meant it, told Labelt he was an adventurer on a mission, and warned him this place would chew him up if he wasn't careful, and practically shoved him toward freedom. So Libelt froze for a heartbeat, locked eyes with Junpei and nodded, accepting it. Junpei grabbed his attention and told him the truth. Survive on his own now, because even with this messed up world around them, his life was his to claim, no one else's. With that last surge of courage, Junpei barked the order, "Go." Labelt bolted without a second thought, and Junpei couldn't help but wonder, quietly, if he was wasting his time trying to help. But in the end, he decided it was all good. He still had enough wiggle room to step in and help one or two kids. He took a step, and the word help clung to his thoughts like a warning. Mia's face flashed in his mind, and suddenly he started wondering if this quest would be the last time he and her ever stayed together. He reminded himself, this outside world is temporary. Once my tasks are finished, I'm getting back fast. Even knowing the truth, a tiny spark inside him still begged to stay with her a little longer. Meanwhile, Mia crept through the area, teeth clenched with frustration as she searched in vain for any chimeras left. Then she snapped to a decision. She'd race back to Takashi and check on how he was holding up. That made her snap and fix herself. Takashino, wait, it's take to Junpei. She couldn't wrap her head around it. He just casually butchered his own name to slip in that fake. In her eyes, he was a total mystery, someone lost in this world, yet ridiculously strong. Once this quest wrapped up, she was going to make him spill every secret. His battles, his past, and maybe even the one romance that started it all. If this all kept moving forward, she prayed she'd stand by him, right there, side by side, until they could be together. Mia froze when a shape snapped into view, someone standing perfectly still in the courtyard, so she narrowed her eyes, edged forward on quiet feet, and peeked around the wall. A mysterious figure loomed in the middle of it all, watching, waiting, and pulling every eye toward them. The corpses. As Mia peeked once more, the blur snapped into focus. There was a woman. Mia spotted a fallen monster up ahead and couldn't help wondering, did this stranger wipe out the last chimeras? Cold sweat broke across Mia's face, and dread clamped down in her chest. This woman felt insanely ominous, and Mia started to piece it all together, until the mysterious woman vanished in a blink, then reappeared right in front of her again. Mia spotted her at once, the white-hooded woman. Before Mia could even react, a brutal punch detonated across her face, blasting her backward and skidding across the ground. As she teetered on the edge of falling, she clutched the end of her weapon tighter than ever. Mia glared hard, and the truth hit like a punch. This woman was way too strong, and Mia didn't have many exits left. If she bolted and dragged her attention away from Junpei, things might spiral less than they would otherwise. Still, she couldn't shake the hope that she could stall her, just long enough to stop the disaster before it fully exploded. Her face turned ice cold as she whipped a razor-sharp weapon straight for the woman's eye. The white-hooded woman slipped aside like it was nothing, her eyes widening just a beat before Mia launched forward with raw determination. Then she hissed that Mia had to finish her off while she still could. The woman snapped a swift kick into Mia's attack, redirecting it with sharp, razor-precise movements. Without hesitation, Mia sprinted straight at her, weapon clenched tight, while the woman cocked her fist, ready to smash, right as they collided head-on. Mia yanked her hidden strings. Then the curved blade whistled through the air and dove straight down toward the woman from above. A sharp flicker of triumph lit up Mia's eyes, like she could taste victory, because she thought she had it all in her grasp. Meanwhile, Junpei slammed on the brakes, sensing something painfully off in the air. Cold sweat trickled down his cheek as he finally understood. Something was horribly wrong. He couldn't stop wondering if the noise in the dark was Mia duking it out with chimeras, or if it was something way more terrifying. He sprinted straight for the noise, and the moment he stepped out, a horrifying sight slammed into him and locked him to the spot. Two silhouettes slammed into each other in front of him, trading blows with ruthless, perfect control. Blood dripped steadily, carving a crimson trail across the floor as Junpei fought to make sense of what he was seeing. Only, he thought he'd already seen enough horrors to be numb by now. Nothing like what he'd ever lived through before. What he saw hit his brain like a wrecking ball. His mind couldn't even process it. His face went numb, stunned stiff, utterly frozen, like he couldn't move even one muscle as the woman's fist landed. Had slammed straight through Mia's stomach, and Mia stayed suspended in the air, face stuck in pure shock as the woman's arm drove deeper and deeper. Jump's brain erupted, Mia, but then terror hit again, just as fierce, Nariko. His eyes snapped onto it and refused to blink, locked on the nightmare brutality unfolding right in front of him. The woman's fist slammed straight through Mia's stomach, and Junpei just stood there, frozen solid as his thoughts spiraled out of control. Noriko, that white-hooded woman, the brutal collision, the blood, the impossible moment right in front of him. His brain couldn't even grasp why she was here. Mia, what just happened? The attacker inched her arm out of Mia's stomach, and Juin's eyes blew wide with pure horror, staring as the whole thing unfolded like a nightmare he couldn't snap out of. Mia slammed into the ground with a brutal thud, blood splattering out as a glowing skill card snapped into existence in the woman's hand. It was a poison immunity skill card. Its description said poison would turn useless unless it could slip into the body through an open wound, and Junpei's jaw literally dropped in disbelief. Then the white-hooded woman went perfectly silent, standing frozen, before she slowly bled out of existence, vanishing like she'd never stepped into the scene at all. Junpei stayed frozen, whispering Mia's name inside his head, the shock squeezing him so hard he couldn't move, until it finally loosened, and power surged back into his legs. Then he exploded into a frantic sprint, eyes locked on her battered form, screaming for her in his mind, again and again. Mia. Junpei dropped to his knees, yanked her into his arms, and yelled her name like his world was ending, while Mia cough-splattered blood. Agony ripped through her body as she fought to say his entire name, and just as she choked up, Junpei screamed her name again. Mia, his voice trembling while she shakily lifted her hand. He raised a shaking hand. In her trembling palm, a tiny object clung for dear life. Then, with the final ounce of strength she had left, she smashed it to pieces. In a blink, her wound snapped shut, stitches of light crawling across her abdomen, and Mia forced out a shaky breath. This bought her a little more time. Even she could hear how thin and fragile her own voice sounded. She gave a quick, pained laugh and admitted she'd grossly underestimated that woman, because wow, she was way stronger than anyone could have guessed. Junpei tried to block her path, swearing he'd hunt down someone who could actually heal her, but Mia, barely holding on, whispered Tequan, weak as a breath and still stubbornly firm. She warned him her time was already slipping through her fingers, and the medicine she'd taken could only buy her a short, fragile stretch of life. Mia leaned in and said this wasn't the kind of wound normal healing magic could ever fix. She was basically staring down the end of her life. Junpei froze mid-breath as her words hit him. Helplessness surged through his chest like it was tearing him apart. Mia kept her voice low, begging him to put her to rest before the end finally swallowed everything. She practically shoved all her exp and hardened skills into his hands, like it was no bigger deal than asking for a snack. Blood kept trickling from Mia's lips, yet she still forced a soft, heartbreaking smile. She leaned in and told him the white-hooded woman had already swiped her poison immunity skill, and even though she didn't know the exact rules skill hunters played by, she still had 2 other skills left, 2 she wanted him to take. Junpei's eyes flashed with shock when he realized she'd figured out his real name, and Mia let out a quiet chuckle, then hurriedly apologized for sneaking a look at his status earlier. She told him that the white-hooded woman had muttered something creepy, like Junpei needed an apology for being dumped into the dungeon in the first place. Mia admitted she didn't fully get what was going on between them, but she was sure of one thing. Junpei had unfinished business with that woman, and that's exactly why he needed her and what she could finally offer. They went dead quiet, and the weight of it all dropped between them like a suffocating shroud. Junpei's expression twisted with pain as he killed his transformation magic, and in the blink of an eye, his real face returned. Then he admitted it was true. He'd only changed his appearance to pursue. Revenge burned in him, and he was dead set on getting it, no matter what it cost. But Mia, his mind screamed, because there was no way he could swallow this. Not like this, not here. With Junpei trembling under the crushing weight of everything, Mia shot him a gentle, encouraging smile, then shut her eyes. A soft chuckle burst out of her as she confessed how unreal it all felt, like they'd barely even met. Still, every second she'd shared with him hit like pure joy, the happiest she'd ever felt since she first arrived in this world. Mia sucked in a breath, glaring at him, then snapped that he couldn't let her death mean nothing, because her life was hers to take, and she was going to decide exactly how it ended. Junpei froze on the spot, emotions whipping into a violent storm inside him as the night pressed closer, leaves sliding past in the cold wind. Without a single word, he yanked open the box, drew his gun, and his hands shook like they were terrified. Mia called out to him gently, Junpei-kun, and told him that even with that cold exterior, her heart knew his kindness always leaks through, and he'd better watch it, whether he wanted it or not. Ju and Pei's faces contorted like they'd been hit, and Ju's expression twisted into raw, unbearable agony. Mia let out a soft giggle, and leaned in to whisper that she'd grown to love him exactly as he was right now. She urged him to hurry, demanding he finish it before her life drained away completely. Junpei's tears spilled non-stop as the shot tore through the quiet night, blood blasting into the dark like a savage crimson flower. Junpei didn't even flinch. He just stared stone still, while Mia's hands slowly turned death pale and her life slipped away completely. A deck of light and a status window snapped into existence in front of him, flickering in midair like they were waiting to be challenged. Junpei just froze, staring them down with a tight, unshakable expression. Then he slowly lifted his hand toward them. He slid his hand over Mia, hit the butcher button, and watched in awe as two fresh skill cards popped into view, one of them being Dagger Mastery, a heroic ranked skill. Junpei couldn't help but wonder if Nariko took poison immunity, just because she'd decided these last two skills were totally worthless. He finally got why Nariko sucked at daggers, and even he had to admit the other skill looked pointless at first glance. But Junpei leaned in and stared harder, his mind racing like, if he learned to use it right, this power could become his secret trump card. That's the ultimate trump card, just like he pictured word for word, and it could slam Noriko for good. Not just some random trump card, this was the kind of move only Asterisk he could pull off, a weapon built for him alone. A loud voice ripped through the air, announcing that registered participant Hirata Takashi had finished the quest, and that his rank points were now in his hands. Another message slammed in, rank up. Hirata Takashi had finally been promoted to Adventurer rank B, and his hunter job was now officially registered. His skill points shot up from 5 to 10, and his unclaimed points blasted sky-high to 5,250. Junpei froze at the number, narrowed his eyes, and swore that every single one of his stats had to hit 300 or more. The numbers snapped into place at once, and he was left with exactly 4,500, so a mischievous smirk crawled across his lips. He muttered that the next upgrade was obvious, a total no-brainer. AGI base 7500 just got updated. Junpei erupted in a shout, swamped by the sensation, insisting he could feel Mia living inside him. He kept leveling up his status and sharpening his skills with ruthless, non-stop determination. Then he pushed himself up off the ground, leaving my body cold behind, and under his breath he hissed up at the sky, begging the god, asking if he'd seen it all and where I was supposed to go next. Hidari flashed a smug grin, congratulated him, and told him to head straight back to the spot where he'd first crash-landed in the forest. There a door was waiting, ready to yank him right back into the dungeon, and Junpei just nodded, no questions asked. After the god's command, Junpei sprinted back toward the forest. Then, out of nowhere, a furious voice shattered the air, the old lady exploding with pure frustration. She snarled and cursed up a storm, screaming that the mage who was meant to make her toys got seized by the Adventurers Guild, so now she'd have to haul herself and hunt down fresh materials. She clenched her teeth, unleashed a furious rant, and swore this was the only way, so those poor kids could finally pay for their sins and make it right. Junpei kept walking like nothing could rattle him, until the old lady finally spotted him. She spun around as if he'd just appeared out of nowhere. Eyes narrowed to deadly slits. She stared at the unfamiliar guy, then demanded to know if he'd caught her rambling somehow. Her expression turned grim as she growled that she wouldn't let him slip away after hearing that. Then she clenched her weapon tight, pushing him to come to the church with her so they could talk. In the blink of an eye, her words got snatched away mid-sentence. Heads rained to the ground, sliced clean in an instant, yet Junpei kept striding past, never even once looking back. He pushed onward, stone-cold and steady, one step after another. Then out of nowhere, his knees gave way and dropped him. Junpei crumpled to the ground, eyes blazing with a fury so bottomless it felt like it could swallow the night whole. Then he hissed her name like poison. Tatsumiya Noriko, you're dead. Jun's mind went into a chaotic spiral. He couldn't stop replaying the moment Noriko tricked him, then wondering how she pulled it off and survived alone, and what kind of nightmare could have warped her into someone unrecognizable. Yeah, in a world this twisted, he could picture the kind of hell she'd been trapped in, because anyone who survives long enough gets changed by it, remade from the inside out. Still, that kind of transformation wasn't his problem anymore, not after everything that happened. Junpei stomped into the dungeon, eyes narrowing hard as he scanned every shadow with razor-sharp vigilance. He kept moving ahead by himself, sinking deeper into his thoughts as that crushing silence wrapped around him like it had weight. Mia's words hit his mind again, right back to the way that woman earlier insisted she had to apologize for tossing him into the dungeon. Junpei immediately shut it down. He didn't care about her motives or any secret agenda she might be hiding. But Noriko, if she truly walked into this place, she'd have said the exact same thing. So long as both of them kept breathing, there was no way their roads wouldn't collide. Junpei barked out a pissed-off mutter as that brutal heat slammed into him, wondering if this was exactly what the guy meant when he said you can't clear the floor yet. And standing here, he had to grudgingly admit he was probably dead on. If Junpei had still only had 5 points in defense, he'd have burned out long before he ever reached this spot. He crossed the cracked, lifeless ground and froze in front of a lone wooden house, standing too perfectly in the middle of the wasteland like it crashed into the dungeon by mistake. He stopped a few steps away, lifted his gaze and his face hardened. The closer he stared, the tighter the tension in his eyes grew and sweat slicked the side of his face, not from panic, but from the gut-churning certainty that something here was wrong. This place wasn't normal. Junpei stalked around the little wooden cabin, studying it from every angle as his cautious steps crunched over the cracked, dry ground, and the whole thing felt wildly wrong, too plain, too peaceful, standing alone in the middle of this deadly wasteland. A cold dread didn't settle in his chest as he stared at the cabin even harder. Its sudden presence made him wonder if someone truly lived here, or if the dungeon was playing a trick, hiding a setup inside its warped design. The place was eerily quiet, yet he could still feel a faint, living presence behind those wooden walls, like they weren't as abandoned as they looked at first. He slid up to the window, and his eyes narrowed instantly, because the calm behind the glass didn't comfort him at all. It felt like something on the inside was watching him, silently and on purpose. Then his eyes snapped to the ground. Right in front of the cabin sat a small envelope, perfectly placed on the cracked soil like someone meant him to find it. Junpei froze, because that wasn't random trash or leftover debris. It was a letter, unmistakable proof this spot mattered, and whatever waited beyond those walls was planned long before he ever showed up. When Junpei picked it up, that familiar man popped into existence like a magic trick, grinning and greeting him with way too much energy. He immediately bombarded Junpei with frantic questions, rattling off his health first, then teasing him about whether he'd found a girlfriend yet, laughing at his own jokes the whole time. Then the man launched into a rant about this floor, painting it as something awful and painfully frustrating. About its brutality, he told me a colossal manticore was lurking just out of sight. He broke down how that creature didn't just attack normally. It could blast a target with triple hits of poison and paralysis in a blink, and it also shrugged off both physical and magical blows while healing itself on the fly, making it an absolute nightmare of a monster. And then he finished with one casual line, "All right, I gotta book it now." Junpei didn't even dare believe escape was real. His water-dried tears were gone, everything he had was already spent, and the manticore was just waiting for him in a cave up on the eastern hill. Junpei scanned the area and straightaway spotted the cave looming in the distance. The man leaned in and insisted that if Junpei just waited for the perfect moment, escape might still be possible. Then he tossed Junpei a line that sounded like real luck before slipping out of sight. Junpei's eyes snapped wide as the man's words hit his mind. There was a colossal manticore prowling this floor. But the moment he finally got there, he froze, because the monster was already finished, its head snipped clean off its neck. Shock tore through him. This creature was absolutely dead, perfectly still, and not even his sharp appraisal could make sense of it. Junpei couldn't stop wondering if the cabin's mysterious resident had already killed it. He jolted as the door creaked open out of nowhere, and that silence instantly got shattered. It felt like something, or someone, was beckoning him right in, so Junpei swallowed the fear, took the silent dare, and vowed to find out what monster was waiting on the other side. He slipped into the house with bated breath, shocked by how normal it looked, then froze at the unnaturally cool air that felt almost too nice, like it was waiting for him. He felt something unmistakable lurking just past that nearby door, and with careful, silent precision, he moved right up to it. Then he slammed through the door with his gun up, all set to fight. A woman sprawled on the sofa, chuckling softly as she clocked his wildly dramatic entrance. Junpei froze in shock, staring wide-eyed. She barely even glanced at him, scarfing food like he was just background noise. She looked way more amused than worried by his. He just kept staring at the screen like this was no big deal, and then, out of nowhere, he offered her a drink. Junpei stood there, utterly baffled, like his brain couldn't catch up. She scanned her surroundings, staring at the trash pile of soda cans, trying to figure out if this was all some illusion. Then reality hit harder and harder, too real to ignore, and his confidence kept slipping away. She kept on relaxing, calm as ever, giving him zero reason to worry. Her easy, natural vibe screamed that she wasn't trying to trick him, and Junpei instantly clocked it. No illusion, no mind games, nothing interfering with him. Still keeping his gun raised, Junpei stared her down and weighed the terrifying idea that she'd already wrecked the manticore somewhere above, because she stood there unshaken, calm as ice, and that fearless composure only made his suspicion grow. She kept talking, saying she'd come to this floor for a specific reason and that the massive creature blocked her way, and she cut it down without a second thought. The moment Junpei caught up, realization hit like a shockwave. Her eyes widened. Anyone who could casually erase something that huge wasn't just some regular resident. The woman shot back hard, saying, "I've told you 3 times, let me finish watching first." Then she tore through the footage one last time, slid the CD back into place like she'd done it 100 times, and noted, straight-faced, that this DVD only showed up thanks to a friend of a friend. And every single time she hit play, she devoured it with pure joy, no matter how many times she'd already watched it. The woman gushed about her love for idols, saying their very presence soothes everyone who's been worn down or hurt by life. After 2010, she mused, Japan's people would drown in stress and cling to idols as one of the last spots where feelings could breathe. Then she smirked darkly and admitted that if it was really that grim, she might just try to crank the pressure even higher. She pushed up out of her seat, looked Junpei over with a hint of disappointment, and realized he wasn't really into idols at all, so she shrugged it off and got ready to properly introduce herself. She introduced herself as Maijutsu, pointed out it was their second meeting, and made sure he knew how grateful she was. What led up to all of this? Junpei was stuck in his own head, until the truth snapped into place, and embarrassment hit him so hard he flinched. Mugetsu greeted him with teasing swagger, calling out Juin Pekuin like it was a nickname, or maybe she meant the main guy, while he still looked completely chill in her pajamas. Junpei stared at her like she'd lost the script, and it made him spiral back to the old fantasy, how he once thought she would be the heroine in some adventure story, until it all flipped. The moment they stepped into the dungeon, she couldn't shake the chilling thought, maybe he wasn't just a side character, maybe he was the real protagonist. When Junpei pressed who she was talking about earlier, Mugetsu finally snapped back. She meant Tatsumi and Ariko. Without warning, Junpei snapped into motion, popping up behind her and driving a dagger to her throat in one brutal second. Pressing Mugetsu for answers about Noriko's whereabouts, he stayed icy calm and told him to just chill. She insisted they'd clash again for sure, because only those two brats were actually hunting to conquer the dungeon. But before she picked him for the spotlight, she needed to make sure he really earned the role, like, truly earned it. So after watching him, she figured the next floor would be where he hit his limit, and right then a bead of nervous sweat popped onto Junpei's skin. He demanded to know who she really was, and Mugetsu just shrugged it off, saying she was nobody more than someone who'd shown up a bit earlier than he did. Then, in a blink, she vanished from sight. Then she popped up behind him like it was nothing, and Junpei froze in pure shock. Mugetsu just smiled softly. She admitted she could be rough around the edges, but she fully expected them to look out for each other. Junpei was still reeling, and when he looked back at her, pure shock hit. She was moving so fast it broke his brain, way past anything he could even wrap his head around. Hatsu made it crystal clear. No tricks, no time games, just raw breakneck power, and the whole thing he saw was straight up speed, too. And earlier, she'd held back only so he wouldn't struggle for no reason and waste himself on futile resistance. Then she pointed down the hallway, and right there, door to the next floor, was wide open. Mugetsu shoved Junpei ahead and revealed it. The door to the next floor had finally swung open. Her steps stayed steady and precise as she guided him straight toward it. She flashed him a small, knowing smile, and Junpei shot back a sharp, cautious glare, his guard up like always. Junpei stepped forward, eyes scanning the ruins like he owned the silence, while his thoughts churned non-stop over something he couldn't quite shake. He kept badgering her over and over about what she really knew, but every single time, she just sidestepped the answer and flipped the subject with effortless ease, forcing him to go through that door exactly the way she wanted. He was sure this Maijutsu woman had to know something about Noriko, so he bit his tongue, played along, and waited, because he was going to uncover exactly what she was hiding. Her unnatural speed and brutal combat power shoved her into a whole different stratosphere, and Junpei realized there was no way he could push anything out of her, no matter how badly he wanted to. Lost in a storm of thoughts, his footsteps clapped softly against the pavement. That solid certainty crumbled the second he stepped through the door, and ran headfirst into something he never saw coming, and now he couldn't stop wondering if it was all stitched into Maijutsu's plan too, until a tired sigh finally slipped out of him. Junpei swallowed his doubts and cracked open the next letter, and right on cue, the man burst back onto the scene, roaring his usual loud welcome before immediately launching into what the monster on this floor was. He bragged that this floor's monster was a minotaur, an absolute beast, famous for crushing strength and ruthless brutality. He hammered home how terrifying this monster truly was, straight up comparing it to the manticore from the last floor, and making it clear this one was just as deadly. The man said that by now Junpei should have gotten the pattern. When things went bad, running was usually the only way out. And through his retro vision, all he saw on this floor was a brutal pileup of heartbreak, making Junpei's face sink with dread at the warning. He cut himself off, said he'd stop rambling, fired off some luck for Junpei, and urged him to think hard before he made his move. Then the letter vanished. Moments after he disappeared, the ruins erupted with a heavy rustle, and a monstrous creature surged up over Junpei, slamming a towering shadow across him. Junpei instantly snapped on his appraisal, and boom, Lotta flashed in front of him. Danger level A+, a loyal royal attendant and fighter, serving the Minotaur as a subordinate of the royal court. Junpei didn't hesitate for a second. He surged forward, dying to test that new power he just unlocked, his anticipation roaring louder with every step. Suddenly, the Lottas struck forward as one fangs flashing, axes whipping up high for the kill. Junpei didn't even flinch. He stayed frozen until the perfect heartbeat, then vanished the instant the closest one lunged in. The monster screeched to a stop and spun around, totally lost, until Junpei popped up behind it and snapped its neck with one cold, merciless twist. Junpei watched its head spin through the air, and in that calm moment he knew, once his stats hit the mark, he'd flatten opponents with nothing but his own bare hands. He got ready to swing again, but right before he could move, a shout ripped through the air. Someone calling his name, asking if he was okay, like they were old acquaintances reappearing. A tank-like armored man tore past Junpei and barreled straight into the chaos, roaring as he slashed his blade with earth-shaking force. The old warrior swung in one perfect arc and split Lotha's neck. Blood blasted through the air as the creature crumpled to the ground. Junpei gawked at the man in disbelief, and the old warrior snapped his gaze to him, checking that he was okay, then pushed him to handle the rest, only to catch, a second later, that the final one had already crumpled. Suddenly, the old man snapped into realization and erupted into laughter, confessing, yeah, it was his fault for missing the truth sooner. He told me he spotted Junpei alone and unarmed, so he charged in without even thinking. Then, once he saw Junpei's raw power, he blurted out that he was a master baller and laughed so hard that Junpei just stood there, mortified by the whole surprise title. The bearded man introduced himself as Vigor, but everyone knew him as Gassen. So Gassen leaned in, curious, and demanded Junpei's name, and Junpei shot back with his full name, Taekda Junpei. Gassen muttered that Taekda wasn't a name he heard much, and when Junpei told him, just call me Junpei, it instantly turned into a whole string of brutal mispronunciations. Until Junpei gay. With the old man roaring with laughter, he let Gassen call him whatever he pleased, then leaned in to ask if he was a foreigner, claiming names got impossible when you'd gone that long without speaking to a soul. Junpei swallowed a heavy sigh, reminding himself that running into people in this dungeon was normal, even though nothing good ever seemed to crawl out of here, while he privately clocked that this guy was far too frivolous for his own good. Still, he decided to pry into what the man knew. As they walked, Gassen said they'd reached his safe resting area. Then Junpei called him Vigor, and the guy snapped right back, insisting Junpei call him Gassen, just like everyone else. Junpei nodded and fired back, asking how long Gassen had been stuck on this floor, only for Gassen to hesitate, then admit he had no clue whether it had been days or months. Once he slipped into his safe zone, Gassen started spilling his whole story. He hated bragging, but he was already getting recognized outside his hometown. Sure, he grew up in a regular, everyday family, but he grinded non-stop and eventually rose into a world-famous adventurer. He kept boasting, proudly admitting he even helped subdue the demon lord, and when Jump's jaw dropped in shock, Gassen just burst out laughing, telling him how that same mission blindsided him and somehow made him fall for an elf girl. Gassen couldn't stop raving about how adorable she was and how brutally powerful her magic felt, like a force you could never ignore, and as their love finally bloomed, they chased dreams of total victory, pictured huge celebrations, and a super love wedding in his words, bursting with pure, overwhelming happiness. Then his voice snapped colder, and he warned, good things don't last, not even for a second, and they vanish without warning. Both he and his wife were yanked into that dungeon like it swallowed them whole, right out of their lives. He told them how despair swallowed them the second they realized they'd been dragged into that broken dungeon. Then he and his wife, Arya, clung to each other, drifting through the halls until they finally stumbled onto this floor. Gassen kept talking, and the second they reached the palace, a minotaur charged out of the front. Yeah, he'd seen its kind before too, right there outside. But none of those even came close to how brutally powerful the one on this floor is. He told me Arya vanished through a crack in all that chaos, and even though he screamed at the top of his lungs and fought to, he couldn't reach her in time. He was already too late, and they got torn apart mid-battle. In the middle of the brawl, his legs got wrecked by brutal injuries, and that savage minotaur shifted its focus straight onto Arya. Gassen spoke darkly, warning that minotaurs were infamous for hunting women, drawn in by their scent, so they could tear into their flesh. He was sure that monster had been hunting Arya from the very beginning, so he crawled forward in pure desperation, screaming in his own mind that he had to stop it. But when he finally got there, the beast already had the area littered with blood-soaked clothes. Gassen went death, still in horror, instantly realizing he'd failed to save her, and it was already too late. Junpei leaned in hard as Gassen kept talking, saying he'd fled back to the safe zone to heal up, also he could at least find Arya's body, and finally give her a real burial. The Minotaur swallowed it all in one brutal gulp. There was nothing left, not even scraps, not even a trace. He admitted he wanted revenge more than air, but without a way to bait that monster out, he had zero chance. The only thing that could lure it from the palace was the scent of a woman. Junpei stayed silent as Gassen's gaze sharpened into pure, burning resolve. The old warrior insisted he wasn't ready yet, but he wouldn't quit until Arya's killer paid. Gassen held the silence for a beat, then chuckled softly and admitted he just happened to spot Junpei while training. Junpei grinned right back, swearing that somehow their journeys felt almost eerily alike. Gossen admitted he usually hated talking to people, and Junpei shot him a raised brow look, until Gossen insisted, straight to his face, that Junpei was genuinely incredible. Junpei stared in pure confusion, and that's when Gossen finally broke it down. He'd never talked about his past, but somehow with Junpei, the story just spilled out, dragging him straight back to his childhood. He remembered the day he got orphaned, back when the church still ruled everything. They caught him, and an old hag from the church almost crushed his life. Right when it seemed over, a sudden adventurer swooped in to save him, someone whose name he couldn't even remember, and who somehow looked almost exactly like Junpei's age. Juin's eyes popped wide as he listened, and the wave of emotions in his story hit him like a lightning bolt. Gossen kept going, clutching every last word in his mind, like they'd been the key to everything all along, right there, waiting. Told him his life belonged to him alone, and to never hand it over to anyone else. Junpei went still, completely stunned by what Gossen said, and by how it mirrored his own past, right down to that same scar on Gossen matching the boy he once saved. Gossen insisted those plain words had hauled him through life, and they became the exact push he needed when it mattered most. Those words hit an orphan like a parent's last lesson, something he'd carry in his bones for the rest of his life. Junpei dropped his eyes to mask the flood of feelings swelling in his chest, while Gossen apologized for talking on and on like some old man. A wild grin snapped across Junpei's face the second it clicked. This dungeon was pure madness, where time and space twisted out of reason. Junpei insisted that he should be the one to offer the item, so when Gossen demanded what he meant, Junpei raised his voice again and cut him off. Then he pushed him forward and snapped, "It's time to go." When Gossen blurted, "Where?" Junpei shot back with zero doubt. Naturally, they were marching to prove the Minotaur who ran the show. Gossen's eyes flared like lightning the moment Junpei encouraged him. Hesitation hit hard when he reminded Junpei. The Minotaur only snapped to a woman's scent, and even if they managed to bait it out, their survival odds were basically zero against that brutal, unstoppable power. He said he could tell Junpei wasn't some ordinary guy, but he still refused to underestimate the sheer brutality of that monster. Then Junpei just answered, calm as ever. So yeah, now they'd have to bully it even harder and land the knockout.